Right. So I'll record all the sessions and I will post them. Right. So woe be to those who didn't show up today. They won't have to do Canvas. Oops. Nevertheless. But I'll record all the sessions. You can always go back and review it. I try to post them the same day as the training. Sometimes it's a couple of days later. It depends. It takes me a bit to process it after it's done. All right. But if you miss a day, it's not to worry. You've got the recordings. You can go back and view it. We prefer that people attend every session. If you miss every session, though, it's like we got to have a conversation. Right. But if you miss one here and there, not to worry. You guys, you understand your responsibilities. We're all adults. Enough said. Any questions for me before we go? All right. And again, as we're going through the material, and I'll mention this again too, there's two things that'll happen. If you've got a question, feel free to raise your hand. Literally, you can wave at me and say, hey, wait a minute, right? And you can ask me a question. That's cool. Or you can just digitally raise your hand and it will get my attention and I'll get to it. But if you raise your hand and I don't see it, feel free to just say, hey, Jim, right? The goal is knowledge transfer. The goal is learning, not to see how fast I can get to the material or see how well I can do without being interrupted. That is not the goal. So feel free to ask questions at any time. Fair enough. Everybody good? By the same token, I will be going through a material and I will stop periodically. And I have these routine things I say. Is everybody okay with that? Does anybody have any questions? Anything outstanding? Are you guys good? All those are invitations for you to ask me for clarification if needed. If nobody says anything, I'm naturally going to conclude we're all good to go and I'm going to jump to the next thing. Everybody cool? A couple of warnings. For a boy from South Georgia, I talk really fast and my accent's not that thick. So I wind up talking really quick. And that's how we cover all this material in 4 hours. I'm like, I could do the TV commercials where they do the disclaimers at the end. Tag. Nevertheless, if I say something, and some of us, English is not our first language. People talk about learning the second language. I hope to learn the first one, right? So don't worry about that. I'll make a lot of cheesy jokes because people have fun better when they're learning. They learn better when they're having fun. And so there's that. Make sure you're asking questions. Make sure you check in. I'll check in and just see, because I cover a lot of material really quick. Fair enough. So, it's an interactive thing. And that's why I like to be able to see your faces. If everybody would always have their camera on, for me, that's ideal. Because I can watch what you're doing and judge, are people like mystified or whatever the case is. Okay, with all that said, any questions for me before we go? Any questions for Angela before we go? Nothing like what's the capital of Assyria or what's a mole? Right.
Jim, I will share one quick
Please.
question that's always asked about the letter grade option. I know I spoke with a few of you on the phone about this, but when you registered, you selected a pass, no pass, or a letter grade. Just know that you can change that option up until the final class meeting. I'm always receive questions about this, and just know it's not set in stone when you've registered. Within your student portal, My Extension, that's another big confusion area. Jim just walked you through Canvas. That's where all of your student materials are, where you're going to your discussion board, taking your quizzes. My Extension is your student portal. If you're new to UC San Diego Extended Studies, again, that's your student portal for all of the classes that you may pursue at UCSD. And so, again, that's where you go to get your grade. That's where you go to change your grading option. Just want to make that clarification. That's always a little bit confusing. Good.
By the way, I'm broadcasting from a remote location today. My mother's elderly and she had some issues, so I came down to visit with her and stay. So normally I'll be broadcasting from my office, and it's the background's a lot better. Right. But with that said,
quick question, Angela, just regarding the letter grade on there. I guess, does it matter if say we are just kind of doing this as professional certification?
Yeah, great question. It on our end, it does not matter. So if you selected pass, no pass, a pass means that you're receiving at least, that you were going to earn at least a C- or above, and you receive all of the same documents. However, your company might care if you're seeking reimbursement. And in that case, you want to check with your company, do they need to receive a letter, or do they need to see a letter grade for you to receive reimbursement? So that's an important check. Good question.
Just a side note, probably 85% of the students receive an A. Almost all the rest get a B. And I've had, in the entire history of the course, I've had one C, right? And either people just don't do the work and they don't pass the class and they get an F, or they get almost everybody gets an A. If you do the assignments and you turn your work in, unless you just completely mess up the quizzes, which doesn't happen, you'll get an A, right? So don't worry about it. Some people get an A plus. Occasionally we get A pluses. I had somebody who had perfect score last semester. Angela had somebody had perfect score all the way through. Their average was 100. It's like, doesn't happen all the time. And this is common in graduate level work too, right? One, students are at a higher level of performance, and two, the performance is, the expectation is self-learning. So with all that said, if there are no further questions, we'll go ahead and proceed with the training. Now, be aware that if you put questions in the chat for me, I may or may not see them. As you've already noted, I have trouble remembering to record. Right. So I can't see the chat, look at faces and do all that. So if you have a question, it's best to stop me and ask me or call my attention to the chat. I do try to look at the chat, but it ends up getting lost in the shuffle sometimes. All right. So I encourage all of you to do this at any point. Will not hurt my feelings. Make sure I'm recording. Now, normally I record at the beginning and that's, cool. But if I forget to record, say, hey, Jim, are you recording? Please do that because it's for your benefit. And I do forget sometimes. Secondly, sometimes I will switch over to another camera to draw things up, right, to illustrate certain points. Make sure that I stop sharing. Make sure it's full screen so that you can see it. Because if I start sharing on another camera, if the picture will be the same as the picture that you see of me speaking now, and it's illegible. So just make sure you call my attention to it. Everybody good, everybody fair. If I start talking, I forget to share the slides. I don't do that very often, but it does happen. Stop and remind me. Everybody good. You will not hurt my feelings. Please. All right, keep me honest because I get excited, right? I'm thinking about the next thing I'm going to say. I'm trying to read your faces. And so anyway, all right, with that said, let's get on with it. I'm going to introduce very briefly a section and I'll move through this briskly so that we can get to actual work on your project. But I want to talk about this idea of process excellence and how we are taking these two tool sets, Lean and Six Sigma, and integrating them together. I'm going to talk very briefly about the history of both. Now, one other thing, let me point out. This is a green black belt course. It's a mixed course. So what that means is the first 5 weeks, we're going to go define, measure, analyze, improve, control. Not exactly parsed into the 5 weeks, but we will cover the entire, problem-solving methodology in 5 weeks. That is the green belt level material. Starting week 6, we'll have more of your colleagues will join the course. Right now, we got 5 more that are planning on joining as black belts only. That is because they've already been through the green belt material. Now they just want the advanced stuff. So what's going to happen is we're going to go through define, measure, analyze, improve, control, and then in the second half, the next 6 weeks, we're going to go through that again. Now I won't go through the define phase, but I will go through measure, analyze, improve, and we will dive deeper in things like gauge R&R or capability analysis or ANOVA analysis or even designed experimentation. We're going to dive deeper in those subjects. The good thing is, Dom, some of this stuff we'll see twice. And so it's a great refresher, reminder of what you saw in the previous 5 weeks. So just be aware of that as we go through. We're going to do a real quick overview as we go through the first 5 weeks, then we'll go into a deeper dive in the second 6 weeks. Everybody good with that? And you think you kind of already understand that if you had, read the syllabus and you got information from Angela. Okay. Process excellence. Continuous improvement is not about the things you do well that we already do well. That's called work. Continuous improvement is about the idea of removing things that get in the way of your work. The headaches, things that slow you down. That's what continuous improvement is all about. All right, there's an important element to capture here. When we say continuous improvement, there's this idea of Kaizen sustain. Kaizen sustain. Kaizen is a Japanese word that means good change. We make a good change to the process, but then we sustain that change, right? If we don't sustain it, entropy kicks in and we're back to where we started. So continuous improvement isn't improve, decay, improve, decay. It's not that. It's improve, sustain, improve, sustain, improve, sustain. That's what we're working towards. And you'll hear me talk that idea through a couple of different times. All right. There's key phrases that you need to pick up in both of these, and they are underlined and emboldened. All right. There's a long definition of Six Sigma that we could read through, but this is the premise. Six Sigma was developed by Motorola in the 80s as a response to poor quality in the field. They were delivering pagers and other electronic goods, radios, walkie-talkies, that they had problems and quality issues. As they started working that through, they realized that variation in their processes, variation in raw materials they're purchasing, variation in inspection, variation in SOPs, variation in adherence to SOPs, variation causes defects. All right. When you have defects in a process, they are a result of something upstream. So the goal is, let's understand what's happening upstream. That is, let's understand where the variation is originating, because variation leads to defects. And I'll talk more about that concept as this continues. Okay. When we talk about Six Sigma, though, and I'm separating Six Sigma and Lean, this is the only time we'll do it, is in this introduction. After that, they'll be together. Six Sigma has these three elements to it, three meanings, if you will. The first is the management philosophy. Second is the statistical measure of quality. And third, most importantly for us, it's the problem-solving methodology, right? But the other two elements are present, right? The management philosophy is this: defects or errors are not inevitable, right? People get accustomed to what they see, they get accustomed to what they experience, and they begin to accept things that are completely unacceptable, right? There's a really good analogy of that, and I read this years ago, and it was about training elephants, right? This was in India. When they have elephants, once the elephant is weaned from its mother and it's no longer dependent on its mother, they will take that elephant, that adolescent elephant, they will chain its leg to a telephone pole that's sunk in the ground 5 feet. And that baby will pull and pull on that telephone pole until it realizes it's a futile effort. Later on, when it's an adult elephant, they will drive a stake in the ground, a little tent stake with a rope, and tie it to the leg of the elephant, and the elephant won't even try to pull it out. Now, we're not elephants. I got you. But the principle happens to us. We will try something, and if we fail, we may try again. If we fail the third or fourth time, we usually just stop, right? We get accustomed to what we see. People begin to accept errors in processes and say, well, it's just inevitable. That's the way the process is. And when we get accustomed to that, we quit trying to improve it. So recognize, regardless of the process, defects are preventable. Second, you got to switch from being reactive to proactive. We rely on inspection all the time. Inspection, auditing, review, right? Analysis after the fact. Those are all reactive. The problem's already occurred. Now we're just trying to catch it before it leaks out to the customer. If we're going to solve the problem, we've got to switch to the other side and be proactive. We've got to determine what's causing the error. All right, two quotes I would like you to write down, because I'm going to talk about this more later on. We inspect or audit or review or get approval. We inspect because we expect to find a defect, right? The only reason we inspect stuff is because we routinely find things wrong with it. If we continuously inspected, never found anything wrong with it, we'd quit inspecting. So the very existence of inspection or auditing or review or approval is demonstrable proof that we've got errors in the process. You guys follow me in the idea, right? We inspect because we expect to find defects, and we routinely do, right? But the other thing I'd like you to think of is this, and this is a little deeper. The goal of inspection is to eliminate inspection, right? The goal of inspection is to eliminate inspection. And what that means is this: every organization has problems, granted, right? We got plenty of them. But all the problems we have root causes. And if we identify the problem and determine the root cause and then control the root cause, we won't have that problem again. The cool thing is, the problems we have, it's a finite set. It's not an infinite set of problems. It's a finite set of problems. And if we work through and solve each one, eventually we'll eliminate all the problems. Right? So for example, one of the problems that I've seen with the course is people didn't understand Canvas. They didn't understand the due dates. They didn't understand they needed to download certain files. That's why we spend the first 10 minutes going through that. I'm preventing that error, right? Now, it's still, there's going to be one or two people have trouble with it. It's no problem. I'll go back, but at least it's not the majority. So that's the idea. The goal of inspection should be to eliminate inspection. To wit, I live in Alabama, about 10 miles from the house. There's a Honda plant, and they make the Odyssey and the Passport and the Ridgeline truck. They also, on site, they have a manufacturing part of their facility that makes the engines that go in and motivate those vehicles. The first time the engine is turned on and tested is when they crank it up at the end of the line and drive it off. They do not assemble them and test them in any way. They are so confident in their ability to control the defects that they don't have to turn the engine on and test run it. The first time it's turned on is when they crank it up to drive it off the line. That's our goal. How do we make our process that good? You know how you do it? You got to use data. We have to get a deeper understanding of what our process is and how it works. That is, we have to measure our process. So here's a couple of other things. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? if you can't measure your process, there's no way to demonstrate what your process is doing and whether or not you're making it better or not. I mean, that's obvious on its face, right? But if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And the corollary to this, and this is the danger though, what gets measured gets managed. And all of us have been, I mean, all of you look like you've had some work experience. If you've worked long enough, you start seeing some of the measures that get put in place and you realize that's driving the wrong behavior. That's making us do the wrong things. That's one of the problems. We sometimes measure what's convenient to measure, not what's best to measure, right? So what gets measured gets managed, and we can actually mismanage it to achieve it. So just got to be aware of that. We got to have data, though. We got to measure our process. And last bit, you got to understand what the customer actually wants. The only way to know what a customer wants is to talk to them. Again, that's obvious. The second part of Six Sigma is the idea of the standard deviation. Everybody's seen the big capital E, right, in math. It's a summation. You've seen it. It's like a W turned on its side, right, capital. That's a capital S in the Greek alphabet. The lowercase s, which is represented by that symbol, looks like a funny looking 6, is sigma. That is a representation of population standard deviation. Standard deviation is a measure of variation. Obviously, the more variation you have, the more defects you'll have. Okay. And so we'll use that idea to begin to understand our processes and understand what we call the area under the curve. Now, this is a little advanced concept, and I'll spend a lot more time on this a little bit later when we get to statistics discussion, right? But the idea here is the larger your standard deviation, the more variation you have. The more variation you have, the more problems you're going to have. And so a 3 sigma process means that you can fit 3 standard deviations, 1, 2, 3, between the average or the mean and the closest spec limit, in this case, the upper spec limit or the lower spec limit. And you can see visually that some of the tail area of the distribution is randomly falling outside of the upper spec or outside the lower spec because of the amount of variation we have, right? The goal is to get to 6 sigma, where we reduce the variation, the standard deviation gets smaller, and we can fit more standard deviations, which are our measure of the variation, between the mean and the spec limit. So you can see visually, this has more variation, the blue curve, than this does. Everybody can see that. Thus, very little of this tail area is extending beyond the spec limits, and we have practically a 0% defective. Right. We'll establish and we'll develop that concept more as time goes on. But that's really a high-level view of what 6 sigma is. A 6 sigma process is virtually defect-free. A 3 sigma process over the long term can generate up to 7% defective, right? The airlines, as far as safety of flying, they're running at like 7 or 8 sigma in terms of the number of crashes per number of flights or number of crashes per miles flown. Luggage handling, on the other hand, it's somewhere around 2 to 3 sigma. They damage stuff all the time and lose stuff all the time, misplace stuff. So it's interesting that what's really, really important, they do good at. The other stuff that's equally important, if assuming you arrive safe, it's like, where's my baggage? We'll get it to you, right? It's like, but, right? I got a wedding to go to. I need my tux. All right. The last part is DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. I pronounce that DMAIC, and you'll hear this term later on, right? And we'll be talking about it. But basically, it's the problem-solving method. What we are doing is taking the scientific method and applying it to problem solving. Okay. You guys have got blank paper. I'd like you to write down the 4 steps of the scientific method, right? I don't have my extra camera here, else I would draw it up for you. But there's 4 steps in the scientific method. Everybody knows what the scientific method is. Very few people can actually recite the scientific method, right? And leave enough space so you can write DMAIC over to the left of it. And I'll talk about it. Okay, the first step in the scientific method is to make an observation, right? What do you see happening? I see planets going around Jupiter. I see when I drop something, it always falls perpendicular to the core of the Earth, not to the hill I'm on, but always falls straight down towards the center of the Earth. Why is that happening? So the first step is make an observation. I see something happening. The second step is to form hypotheses. Now, hypothesis is a big fat word that basically means an educated guess. Educated in terms of your educational background, your undergrad or graduate or your doctoral degree, educated in terms of your life experiences, educated in terms of stuff you've researched. But all hypothesis is an educated guess as to why that was happening, why planets are going around Jupiter or moons are going around Jupiter, why things fall towards the center of the Earth, right? The third step in the scientific method, so first is make an observation. Second is form hypotheses. The third is test your hypotheses, right? There's 2 ways to test it. Passively, which just means go collect data and see if it fits, or actively, where we run an experiment. You can do either one. But that's the idea of testing your hypotheses. Everybody good? So make an observation, form hypotheses, test hypotheses. Once you finalize your hypothesis, if your hypothesis fails, you go back up and pick another hypothesis. If your hypothesis is good, then you go down and develop. And the fourth step is take action. What does that mean? File a patent, go change your process, go make application for a Nobel Prize. I mean, issue a paper, whatever it is. We take action. Now, obviously, when we're in process improvement, we go improve the process, but it could mean anything. So make an observation, form a hypothesis, test hypothesis, take action. Okay. The only thing that's different is the fourth phase. All right. So what is the define phase? It's clearly understand what your problem is in measurable terms. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. Okay. We often go off half prepared and start trying to throw solutions at things. We don't even really understand what the problem is. We understand symptoms, but not the problems. We got to make sure of that. Then measure phase is the form hypothesis. Let's explore the data door. Let's go look at all the existing data we already have. Let's go look at the process and make sure we understand that. Let's verify that we can measure our process. And let's start brainstorming root causes. What do we think is causing it? And then we'll collect data. That's the last part of the measure phase. So that is, we're going to form hypotheses and go collect data. The third step, which is test hypotheses, is the analyze phase. We're going to analyze that data logically, graphically, and statistically, right, to determine what the root cause is. Improve, go fix it. That's the take action. The only thing that's different is control, right? Get a hot cup of coffee, put it on your desk. What's it do? Warm up. Go get a cold bottle of water out of the fridge, put it on your desk. What's it do? It warms up. So the coffee cools off and the cold water warms up. What's everything trying to do? Reach room temperature. You make an improvement to your process. When you walk away, what's it want to do? Go back to what it was. And the more procedural and human-based it is, the more likely that is to happen. Everybody good? So that what we're doing is applying the scientific method to problem solving. Okay, so that's Six Sigma in a nutshell. And I'll talk more about that, the DMAIC process in a moment. Lean, on the other hand, is the natural conclusion of the beginning of something called interchangeable parts. Prior to 1800, when somebody made something, it was always made by a craftsman. And if you broke it, you'd have to go to a craftsman, have them custom make a part to replace what you broke. You break a plow, you got to go get somebody to make a new part for the plow so you can replace it, right? You had a musket, you broke it, you have to go get somebody to get it. You broke your frying pan, you have to go to somebody and have them custom fix it for you because there was no such thing as interchangeable parts. But nowadays, if I've got my USB cord and I've got my charger and my little wall wart charger breaks, I can just go get another one. And the USB mini plugs into everything or whatever that is, micro mini, I can't remember what it's called, universal, USB-C, right? Plugs into anything, okay? So that's interchangeable parts. So that we've gotten away from craftsmanship into interchangeable parts, which led to tolerances, which led to mass manufacturing, which led to lean manufacturing. The epitome, the pinnacle of lean manufacturing is the automotive assembly plant. And once you understand that, you will understand most of the terms that come out of lean. When we talk about takt time, we talk about one-piece flow. We talk about minimized inventory, minimized WIP. We'll talk about Kanbans and supermarkets and Mitsumashis. We'll talk about all these terms, but they are drawn out of the lean system. All right, quick history lesson. In World War II, Winston Churchill called America the arsenal of democracy. One, we were remote from the warring nations, so they couldn't just come bomb us into oblivion. We could bomb them into oblivion, right? At the end of the war, we had decimated those countries. We realized the mistake we made in World War I. Don't make them pay reparations, right? The war's over. Let's build those nations back up. So they went back and started building Japan up and tried to wean them from the militaristic society they'd adopted over the last 100 years or so. And we took the mechanisms and the techniques that were used in America to produce war material, and before that, cars and toasters and everything else, and taught them these ideas, right? They took those ideas and perfected them in the Toyota production system. America abandoned a lot of those ideas. And in the 1980s, they started being reintroduced. Hence, that's why we use all these Japanese terms, because it was ideas that originated here, were perfected by the Japanese while we abandoned them, and they started getting reintroduced by Japanese methodology and mentality being brought back in. That's why we have these Japanese terms, right? But the premise behind lean is all about reducing cycle time, right? People think lean is about waste. Actually, lean is about cycle time. We get rid of waste to reduce the cycle time. So look, and that's the premise here. Non-value added activities increase your cycle time. So if you reduce the cycle time, what do you got to do? Get rid of the non-value add activities. By the way, non-value add is synonymous with, also known as, waste, right? Or even muda. You'll hear this Japanese term muda, which just means waste, right? So eliminate the waste, reduce the cycle time. All right. So what are the principles? Number one, understand what's important to the customer. If you don't, right? Second, identify the value stream. That is a sequence of events that create your value, and eliminate the waste that is in that value stream. Third, get your work to flow continuously. Every time it stops, you have an opportunity for loss, delay, accumulation of inventory, and so forth. So keep it flowing continuously, right? Third, introduce pull, replenish based on pull as opposed to scheduling everything, and then use the structured approach, which is DMAIC, right, to continuously improve it. But the real turning point on lean is to understand what is value added, right? For a step in a process, any process, checking into a hospital, manufacturing a thingamabob, or processing an invoice. For a step in a process to be value added, it has to do three things. It has to do all three things. Number one, it has to physically change the thing going through the process. Engineers will say the form, fit, or function. It has to change one of those things. It has to physically change it. Making a photocopy of something doesn't change it. Taking data on a piece of paper and typing it into a system doesn't change it, right? It's necessary, but it's not value added, right? Value added has to physically change the thing itself, okay? It has to change its form, fit, or function. It has to physically change it. Number two, it has to be so important to the customer they'd be willing to pay the extra for it. Customers don't want to pay for inspection. And I'm going to give you the really cynical view. The purpose of inspection is to lie to our customer to make them think our quality is better than what it is. That's the cynical view. Because what we're doing is we're screening out the bad stuff and only shipping the good stuff. You know what happens inevitably, Rena? We ship bad stuff too because we don't catch everything. 100% inspection is never 100% inspection. So the goal is to make it right the first time. So customers shouldn't be paid. Customers don't want to pay for inspection. Sometimes they will. But, all right. Third, has to be done right the first time. Rework is never value added. It's cost mitigating. It's cheaper to remake it than it is to make it from scratch in many cases, but not always. But it has to be all three. Physical change, customer care is done right first time. If it doesn't meet all three criteria, then by definition, it's non-value added. And the goal is to focus on the non-value added and eradicate it. Okay. There's a useful technique here, and this is one of the things that we learn as we start going through this course. We naturally make the assumption that this policy we're all dealing with has been well thought out and people have planned out all the exigencies. Likewise, we naturally assume the process we're dealing with, someone has carefully thought out every step in the process and they've disciplined themselves to do the step right the first time so we can generate the maximum value. You know what the reality is? Most processes and most policies get hobbled together to address a specific issue at the time. And over time, processes can become so encumbered with things we do that don't add value, they can make the process untenable, okay? So don't assume that it's been well thought out. It may very well have, Andy, I don't know, right? But don't just assume that. Let's start with the assumption that nothing in the process is value added. Now, that's astounding. Let's sit there and say, we're going to assume nothing's value added. People are like, but it's all value added or we wouldn't be doing it. That's where we are, right? That's what we assume. But the reality is very little of our processes is value added. All right, anybody here have children? Anybody got kids? All right, I raised 3 girls, right? If you've ever taken your kid to the pediatrician, what do you spend the vast majority of your time doing? Waiting. Sitting and waiting. You're sitting in the waiting room, you're sitting in the examination room, you're sitting in the billing room, you're sitting back in the waiting room, right? You're sitting and waiting. You spend 2 hours in the pediatrician's office for 5 minutes with the pediatrician. You with me? So very little of the time you spend there is value added. Guys, that's the majority of our process. It's very common. Less than 5% of the time is value being added. The majority of the time is sitting and waiting. So the goal for us is to figure out how to get rid of the sitting and waiting. So we take, if it doesn't fit all three criteria, by definition, it's not value added. It's waste, okay? We divide that into 2 subcategories. Things that we know don't add value, but we got to do them anyway. These are things we do because of regulatory agencies, things we do because of our own internal data collection, things we do because of our own policies, or we got to feed the beast. We got to feed SAP with data, right? We know it doesn't add value to put it in SAP, but we got to do it anyway. And that's useful for problem solving. I'm with you, but it doesn't make us money, okay? But that's non-value add required. We'll kind of hold that off to the side. What's worst is pure out and out waste, the 8 wastes. And we'll talk about the 8 wastes a little bit more in one of the async courses, right? But the 8 wastes there's an acronym, and you'll notice it here, DOWNTIME, downtime, right? Defects, obviously, doing it not right the first time is waste, right? Making more than you need before you need it, right, is waste. Waiting, right? Sitting and waiting, people waiting, equipment waiting, resources waiting, customers waiting. Waiting is non-value added. Not using people's skills, not taking advantage of what people already know about the process and just say, well, you're not qualified, when in fact they do it every day. Or just as bad, having people who are very well educated and have a very specialized function filling out useless paperwork. That's not value, that's wasting people's skills. Transportation. Unless you're UPS or FedEx, transportation is not value added. It may be necessary, but it doesn't add any value to it, right? It's not, unless we're working for a transportation company, then that's what we do, right? But for most of us, moving things around doesn't add value. Inventory, necessary, doesn't add value, right? In fact, and there's a contradiction, there's a paradox here. Accounting systems consider inventory as an asset. It's capital we've invested in something to hang on to have, usually to make product out of, right? But inventory for us in terms of process cycle time is a waste. It's an encumberment. It's actually not an asset. It's a liability, right? So it's just interesting. Our systems make us, and Rena, everybody says people are our most valuable asset, but on a balance sheet, on an income statement, they're a liability. So it's just interesting how our accounting systems work against what we're trying to accomplish. And we got to take that into account. Motion is transportation, but transportation is between steps, motions within the steps. Last, we have extra processing, doing things the customer doesn't care about, right? So when we're trying to achieve process excellence, what that means is we're trying to develop business processes that are efficient and effective, right? What does it mean? What is a process? A process is just a repetitive sequence of events that produces a desired outcome. There is a process to making a cup of coffee. If you do French press, there's a process for that. If you use Keurig, there's a process for that. If you're using Mr. Coffee drip, there's a process for that, right? But there's a process tying your shoe. There's a process to get ready to go work in the morning. It's a repetitive sequence of events, okay? That's what a process is. We are full of processes, right? Every business has lots and lots of processes, okay? Efficient is the economical conversion of raw material to finished goods, okay? The more economically you can do that by minimizing labor, intrusion, cost into it, minimizing waste, minimizing material utilization, using lower cost material that still achieves the necessity of what we're trying to do with our product, the economical conversion, that we're efficient. Effective is, are you satisfying the customer's expectations, both the service and the output expectations? I'll touch on that more later, right? You can be efficient and not effective. You go out of business because nobody buys your stuff. You can be effective, but not efficient. You go out of business because you're not profitable. You got to be both, right? Especially in competition with other people, okay? So it's basically making a process, a repetitive sequence of events that's efficient, does it economically, and it's effective, satisfies the customer, right? And we have to look at all of those elements. All right. So Six Sigma, in summary, is the idea that variation in processes cause defects. So if we have defects or errors, we got to look upstream and figure out where is the variation that caused it. Variation in materials, variation in processes, variation in setups, variation in adherence to SOP, variation in which SOP people are using, right? All that variation leads to defects. Lean, on the other hand, is all about cycle time, okay? So non-value add waste increases cycle time. So if you're going to reduce cycle time, you got to get rid of the waste. Everybody good? I tell you, you know what gets me? Every stinking time I took my kids to the pediatrician, and even when we moved to new pediatrician, they'd make you fill out the paperwork again for the patient as if you're a brand new patient that's never been there. You're like, why are we? And I'd look at them like, nothing's changed. Sorry, sir, we still have to have you fill it out. I'm like, but everything's this, everything. Sorry, sir, you still have to fill it out. I think it's busy work, or it's just, I don't know why they do it. And you know what's even worse, Nally? It's like a copy of a copy of a copy. And the paper's like, the printing is sideways on the page and it's barely legible. And you're like, what is this again? Right? That's waste. And why are they doing it? I guess it's to make you feel better about sitting in the waiting room, other than just sitting and watching reruns of Jerry Springer. Okay. If we looked at a lead time, this is an illustration of a timeline from the time we get an order to the time we ship the order. The pink is the waiting time. We get an order and it sits and waits until we do something, put it in the system, put pricing to it, contact the customer with lead time, whatever it's going to be. Then there's a long wait till we do some non-value added activity. Maybe we're typing it up and printing out paperwork so people will know what to go make. That didn't change the product at all. It's just necessity because of our broken process. Some more waiting time, there's some work, there's some more waiting time, there's some work. Generally speaking, less than 95%, less than 5% of the time a thing spends in the process is it actually being worked on with value. Most of the time, just like us at the pediatrician, we're sitting and waiting. So if you want to reduce this lead time, what do you got to do? Not figure out how to do that green step faster. That's not going to help you. What you got to do is figure out how to get rid of this waiting time. That's usually the biggest issue, right? And so the goal for lean is to simplify the process. Now, there's a collateral benefit here. The less you handle it, the less likely you are to damage it, right? And so, how do you keep from breaking wedding china? Don't use it. Leave it in the cabinet, right? So the same is true in processes. The less you handle it, the better off you are. The fewer the handoffs there are, the better off you are, right? So we want to simplify our process. Usually we get a quality bump just by doing that. And then the second part is eliminate the defects. So if you will, perfect the process. So we simplify, then perfect. When we have inspections, we usually have rework loops. If you want to get rid of the inspection, you got to look upstream and figure out what's causing the inspection. Inspection is never value added. Now, it may be cost mitigating. That is, it lowers our cost because it's a lot cheaper to catch it in-house than it is to ship it to the customer. But it doesn't add value, right? It's just something we do to help screen out the defects. So lean helps us see the unnecessary transportation, the unnecessary inventory, the unnecessary inspection. But lean and Six Sigma work together to eliminate the need for inspection, right? So again, the idea is simplify, perfect. We will develop these ideas in great detail as time goes on. All right. So the integration steps, the most important step is make sure you've got management support. So today I'm going to talk about what is a champion, what's a champion do. Make sure you get that conversation, right? Because you got to have the right champion. That's the leading cause for projects not completing. So I'll talk about that more next section. Okay. Brief review of DMAIC. I've already talked it through. Define. Clearly explain or articulate your problem in measurable terms. And again, if you can't measure it, can't manage it, right? If you can't measure it, you can't prove you made it better. So if you can't even measure it, you may not even have a problem, right? So we got to make sure we know what the problem is, not what the symptoms are, but what is the problem? What is the issue we're dealing with, right? And you got to do it in measurable terms. And there's elements to that. We'll develop a project charter. Measure phase is beginning to identify one of these two relationships. Y is a function of X. This is algebra. It's 8th grade algebra, right? The dependent variable depends on the function and the inputs. Or we could say our output is a function of the process and the inputs into the process. If you got defects, what's happening upstream that's causing it? The second idea is that if you've got excessive cycle time, you got to figure out where the waste is, right? Right. So we're working both of those. And we'll talk about this idea of brainstorming, value stream mapping, process mapping. We'll develop all those. But basically, we're identifying potential root causes and collecting data. We're also verifying our baseline. The analyze phase, go from all the possible root causes down to the critical few, 2 or 3 or 4, that are actually causing your problem. With data, with logic, with graphical, we're going to narrow down using logical, graphical, statistical means. You may even need to run an experiment. Then we're ready to improve the process, right? We're going to apply this idea of pokey okay, which is mistake proofing. That's like headlights that turn themselves automatically off after the car sat for 5 minutes. Back in the good old days, you left your headlights on, they would stay on until they killed the battery. Nowadays, it turns off after 5 minutes in case you forget. That's a mistake proofing device, right? But the results of our solution, R equals Q times A, the results of our solution are equal to how good the solution is multiplied by how acceptable it is to everybody that has to deploy it. If people don't want to use the solution, it's not going to be very effective. Right. Control, maintain the gain. That's the last step. If we make a change to the process, the more procedural and human-based it is, the more likely it is to revert. Let's demonstrate that. Everybody, show me your hands. You got to play along with me. You got to help me out. Show me your hands. Clasp your fingers together like you do. Go ahead and put your fingers together like you're thinking about something. Now, if you can figure out how, undo your fingers and move over one finger and reclasp them again. So your fingers are not in the way you've got them now, right? You've moved everything over. How does that feel? That is not comfortable. That's not what I'm used to. And given the chance, if I take my hands and put them back together, I'm going to put them the way I'm accustomed to. You with me? Right? It's human behavior. Okay. It's muscle memory. All right. Do this. Cross your arms. Everybody cross their arms. I'm not listening to this. Can't believe you're saying that. Brr, 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 brr. Right. Cross your arms. Now, if you can figure out how, put your arm the opposite way. So put the one that's on top underneath the one that's on bottom. Figure out how to do it backwards. If you can figure it out. If you've never done it, this is really confusing, right? You know, how does that feel? That ain't right. And if you put your arms down and I say cross your arms, what are you going to do it? You're going to do it the way you've always been used to doing it. You with me in the idea? This is human behavior. If you go into a process and you change a process that people have been doing it the old way for weeks or months or years, and you change it to a new way, given the opportunity, what will people revert to? Not because they're rebellious, not because they're trying to stick it to the man. It's because they just go back to what they're familiar with. It's our natural habits. You guys good? The more procedural, that is, the more human dependent your solution is, the more likely it is to slip backwards. We need to have a solid control plan to make sure it stays in place. Most projects, if you don't have a good control plan, will gradually revert back to what they were, because that's just our nature. And it's silly, I know, but think about clasping and think about folding. That's just our nature, right? So I've done it enough. I can do it either way and it feels okay. I can cross my arms the other way as fast as I can cross them the normal way, right? Who cares? But the more people, but the takeaway from that is, the more an organization gets accustomed to change, the easier it becomes to change. The easier it becomes to change. The more rigid the organization is, the harder it is to change, right? So if you're an organization that is FDA regulated, or regulated by automotive assembly, or regulated by FAA or whoever it happens to be, it's often difficult to change because people are used to the bureaucracy resisting change because they're trying to keep things consistent, right? But if to improve it, look, different isn't, let me say it again, different isn't always better, but better is always different, right? So people are trying to resist change that don't make it better. But if we're going to make it better, it's going to have to be different. You with me? So it's just, we're fighting against our natural tendencies for change. It's just human behavior, right? So with all that said, when you're working a project, you're doing one of four things: better, faster, safer, lower cost. Better is improving the quality. Faster is reducing the cycle time. Safer is really a quality issue with humans making mistakes. We want to be safer for the human, of course, safer for the environment, safer for our equipment and our resources. We want to be safe, right? When we make errors, we cause defects, injuries, breakages, pollution, right? So really, safer is a flavor of better. And then lower cost. If you do any of the top three, you'll lower your cost. But sometimes we're intentionally trying to lower costs, find a cheaper shipper, find a cheaper raw material, and so forth. So some projects do focus around that. But most projects are in the top two categories. But it's useful for us to know which one we're working on so we can pick the right tools. And in fact, that's the goal of coaching, is to make sure you're pragmatically using the best tools for your particular problem. Okay. Last thing. Ooh, man, this is scary. If you look down the left-hand side, I've got define, measure, analyze, improve, control. Everybody can see that. If you look at the define phase, you see it talks about business cases, value stream mapping, OE, and the charter. If you look at the control, it says SPC and the control plan. The real takeaway is this: all of us, 15 of us, and eventually 20 some odd of us, all of our projects will start the same way. We have a business case, we have a SIPOC diagram, we have a charter, right? We have a primary metric. Everybody has that. All of our projects will end the same way, with a control plan and an executive summary, right? What's different is what type of project. If you're working defects in a manufacturing environment versus a transactional, that is an office environment, right? If you're the approach are going to be similar but slightly different. But if you're working cycle time in a transactional process, that's different than cycle time in the manufacturing process. It's similar, but there's some different flavor of the tools. But you may even be looking at things like, how do I make sure my equipment is always available? How do I make sure that we have labor availability or material availability? Or even, how do we do changeovers more efficient? Each one of these have their own flavor. So the tool sets are different. Now, hey, son, the advantage is we're going to cover all these tools. The disadvantage is they're not all applicable to your project, right? So you're going to be, it's like undergrad. You're exposed to a whole host of different disciplines with a focus on your discipline. So what's going to happen in your project, you're going to focus on a subset of these tools, but we'll cover them all. So part of the goal for coaching then is to make sure you're using the right tools for the right problem. Everybody good with the idea? But recognize all the projects start the same way, all the projects end the same way. It's the middle: measure, analyze, improve, is going to be different. Any questions about what I've covered very quickly? You don't have to be quick in your questions, but I covered that section fast, what I'm getting at. All right. Andy, why did the skeleton not cross the road? He didn't have
I
the
know
guts.
this one. He didn't have the guts.
Yeah, he didn't have the guts, right? So, guys, I'll tell corny jokes. I try to have fun, try to make it, but because you learn better when you're having fun. There's no sense in being all serious. I have to get serious sometimes when I'm talking like what's a standard deviation and what's CPK and PPK. But we'll try to keep it light. Ask questions. Also, We'll take a break about every hour or so. And in order to facilitate that and make sure and I mentioned to you when we started earlier, I'm a big proponent of start on time, stop on time, right? Next week, we will start exactly at 8 o'clock Pacific. There won't be any delay. This week is always the first week of class, right? The same sort of thing. I'm going to suggest to you, when you start running your team meeting, your first team meeting, people are going to show up late. So don't start till you have a good quorum, right? But tell them next week we're starting on time. You know what's interesting? If you set the expectation and you start on time, people will come to your meeting on time. It's really an interesting phenomenon. But if you let people come in late, 5-10 minutes late, what do people do? They'll come in 5-10 minutes late. Now, that's not to say if you have to come to training late, that's fine. But I'm not waiting for you. We're starting at 8 o'clock. Everybody fair? We're adults. If you can't make it on time, make it when you can. I had college professors like, if you can't make it on time, don't bother coming. They would lock the door. We don't do that, right? If you're coming in late, that's fine. You got to drop in and out, that's fine. You got to leave early, that's fine. You got to miss the whole day, that's fine. Just you're responsible for your own activities, right? All right. So what I will do though is I'm going to use a counter, and you guys can see the counter here. I'm working on it. There it is. You guys can see that it's counting down. Can you guys see it? When it gets to 0, I'll resume. I'll see you back in 6. All right, welcome back. We're going to pick up with a conversation about organization roles. I'm going to touch on a couple elements here, and there's a brief exercise we're going to do. One thing that as we go through the training, I'm covering a lot of stuff, right? There are some things, especially when we get into statistical analysis, there are some things that are right or wrong. There's a correct way to do analysis or incorrect way to do analysis. There's things we interpret, there's mathematical formulas we do. Those things are very clear cut, right way and wrong way. There are some things that we will cover where there are best practices. The best practice is this, and I'll explain that. That's the best practice. That's what we commonly do. This is what is most universally. There are some things that will occur that are my opinion, and I will try to differentiate between those and say, this is what I think. This may not be a best practice. It may be a best practice for me personally, but it may not be a universally seen best practice. Right. So I'll try to differentiate between that. I don't want to try to pass my opinion off as fact. Right. I want to make sure that we differentiate. Fair enough. Right. But I will tell you sometimes, like, well, there is really only one way to do this, and it'll be things like sample size calculation or whatever. But when it gets to certain activities like these organization and roles, what I'm going to suggest to you is these are best practices. This is what has achieved the best results over time, right? So it's somewhere between just my opinion and the only way to do it. It's like this is the best way to do it based on experience and based on what other people do. So I'll differentiate between as we go through that, right? Also, as we go through, there may be things that you have different experience on, or you have different perspectives. By all means, feel free to verbalize those. I welcome it, right? If you think that maybe I'm suggesting there's a better way to do it, or you'd like to chat, feel free, right? Now, if it gets too much, we'll take it offline and have a conversation. But I welcome the discussion because it's beneficial for everybody to hear it. And that's why I mentioned earlier, and you've heard this before, if you have a question, chances are somebody else has the same question. Right. So just, be aware of that. Getting into it. I'm going to talk about organization and roles. And we're going to talk about what the structure looks like, what the roles, responsibilities are. And then I'll touch briefly on two tools called a stakeholder analysis and a RACI diagram, which you already are likely familiar with to some extent. Okay. The goal of this project work and the goal of what we're covering is we're not replacing the organizational structure. We're simply enhancing it. And we are focused here right now in our context. We're focused in this middle part with champions, belts, and team members. And that's what I'm going to primarily discuss here. All right. Arguably, the most, other than you, right, and then your team as well, but most important in your project is to make sure you have the right champion, right? The champion does things like helps you identify projects, helps you recruit team members, removes cultural barriers. They have a lot of things they do. So who is the right champion? The champion has to be the process owner, the one that is responsible for the process that you are working on. You could summarize by saying they're responsible for the profit and loss, the P&L of that particular area, right? What we don't want is to have a champion that does not have authority over the process that you're trying to improve, right? We want that, because if the person who has authority over the process you're trying to improve is not interested in improving it, guess what? It's going to be really hard to make changes. Right. So make sure that now you may be, for example, you may be in the quality organization and your manager, the quality manager, wants to go fix an issue in shipping, for example. And so they want you to go fix an issue in shipping. That person who is your boss is not the right champion. They might be a good coach. They might be a good mentor. They might even be a good sponsor. But the champion is the person that's over the shipping area. Because you know what? If the person over the shipping area doesn't see this as a priority and they don't want to fix it, they're not going to provide you resources. They're going to provide you time. They're not going to allow their team members adequate time to go work on what you want to work on or attend your team meeting because they don't see it as a priority. You guys follow me in the idea? Now, there are some people who can be successful no matter what challenges you put out, but most of us mere mortals need the support structure that right? So I strongly suggest that you have the right champion. So they are the one who has managerial responsibility for those resources, right? The personnel, the equipment, and the profit and loss. And if they're not interested in solving that problem, you probably need to pick another project, right? Or go up a level, maybe, okay? And if your project covers 2 or 3 functional areas, the champion needs to be somebody who's above all of those functional areas, because what you don't want to try to do either is have co-champions. It never works. I mean, children figure this out. Mommy, can I go spend the night with Susie? I don't know. Ask your father. Daddy, can I go spend the night with Susie? I don't know. Ask your mother. Well, what did he say? He said it was okay with him if it was okay with you. I mean, kids figure out how to manipulate that stuff, right? And by the way, champions will be doing this. Well, it's not our fault, it's their fault. Well, it's not their fault, it's my fault. You know, whatever. Avoid the problem, right? If you got that sort of project, it's better just to pick another project. I have to guard against you working a project that's not fit for purpose, you working a project that doesn't have good managerial support, and you working a project that's too broad for the purpose of training. So I have to come up with what's a good project and so you guys saw the project selection workbook and it goes through the 6 criteria. What's a good project? And then I have to guard for your projects too big. We often scope projects down to a meaningful size, but bigger and probably more important is having the right champion. I had a colleague of mine years ago. He worked at Johnson & Johnson. He was a master black belt at Johnson & Johnson, and they had been doing Lean Six Sigma training internally for about 3 years. Their projects started off with great success at the beginning, and over time, they started drifting down. They weren't completing on time. They weren't generating benefit and so forth. He worked the master black belt project on why black belt projects weren't successful. And what he found was it was primarily because they had the wrong champion or they had a champion that didn't support the project. And as a result, they didn't give time, they didn't provide resources, they didn't make sure that people adhered to data collection or that sort of thing. So the champion is crucial. Yes, Rena.
So in my role right now, actually, I am a manager. And so is there ever a point where your belt and your champion can be the same person? Or like, because okay. Because that's like one thing I worry about in picking a project is I do have that stake and responsibility in what ideas I've generated.
Right.
And so I'm just trying to understand whether or not a belt and a champion can be the same person.
You can, but this is what you got to deal with. And this is something you're going to have to figure out a way to guard against. We've all been in a situation, we're in a meeting, right? We're all, and all of a sudden somebody who is significantly higher in the organization comes into the team meeting. Everybody will change their behavior. They'll talk a different way. They'll be more careful about what they say. They won't be as flippant. They won't joke around. Everybody gets really serious. And in fact, some people won't say anything because they don't want to be noticed, right? And people will defer to that person because they're authority level in the organization. So Rena, you got to guard against that. A lot of times the people you work for, it depends on your camaraderie and all that. And, you know, the whole thing the officers don't mingle with enlisted people in the military. You got to be careful with that because you lose authority structure on. So you're going to have to figure out a way, how do I navigate dealing with my teamers and getting them to treat me as an equal, right? And not change their behavior and not just defer to what I say, which means you have to be careful about saying, look, team, we are on a genuine, honest exercise to find the truth, not what I think the truth is, right? So yes, you can do it. It just adds a layer of complexity to it. Some people navigate it fine. I'm not sure I could navigate it that well, but many black belts do, right? So you just have to figure out, fair enough, you have to figure out how you're going to manage that and make sure that you are engaging without overriding and getting good feedback out of your people. Everybody
Makes sense. Thank you.
Because you know what it's like. The boss shows up and everybody changes behavior, right? This is an interesting point. It leads to something called the Hawthorne effect, right? Now, this is a little bit of a side note, but the Hawthorne effect is where we put a change in a process and the process gets better. But the reason it got better is not because of the change we put in, it's because we're standing out there with clipboards and stopwatches watching everybody, right? And so we falsely conclude that our improvement was because of our solution, whatever the solution was, when the solution didn't have anything to do with it, right? It's drawn from the idea where they were back in the 50s at a company, I think it was Western Electric, a Hawthorne, Indiana or somewhere, I don't remember what it was. But they went in with the premise that improved lighting in the factory will increase people's productivity. That makes sense. People can see better. They can assemble. Okay, makes perfect sense. But just because something is logically true doesn't mean it's going to play out that way in reality. So you got to be careful with that. Anyway, they went into the factory. They pulled people off the floor, put them in a separate area, changed the lighting, and then stood there and observed their performance. And lo and behold, their performance got better. Naturally, they concluded that better lighting increases productivity. They put them back in the general population, increased the lighting in the factory, and waited for the money to roll in from the increased productivity, and nothing happened. So they figured, well, we got a bad baseline. They took the people off the floor, put them back in the controlled environment. They reduced the lighting to the original level to get a baseline, and what happened? Their productivity went up again, right? So then they're like, well, maybe we just need to introduce disco balls and flashing lights. Maybe that's what made people productive. And it's like, no, they got productive. Why? Because you're standing there with clipboards and stopwatches, right? So you got to be, that's called the Hawthorne effect. And people will put solutions in place. And hey, son, this happens. You go look at the solutions like, I don't see any possible logical way how that made it better. And it got better, but it wasn't because of the solution, right? What is a placebo? Like when they do drug testing, they'll give like half the population the actual drug, and they'll give the other half the population the placebo, which is just a sugar pill or a corn syrup pill or whatever it is, right? Cornstarch. Lo and behold, the placebo works about 30% of the time. It's psychosomatic. People think if I take the pill, I'll get better. You with me? It doesn't do anything. And oh, by the way, some illnesses, if you just wait long enough, the body will cure itself. Some of them not, it depends on what it is. But so the placebo has this effect. It's the same sort of idea. So all said and done, Rena, you just have to guard against that. And anybody that's in that situation is going to have to guard against it. Cool. Everybody good? Champion is arguably as important as you are to the success of the project. They're ultimately responsible for sustaining the project when you're done, okay? The black belt, that's you, right? You lead, you identify team members, you help identify the project. You're not the Lone Ranger. You're not a white knight who rides in on a horse and saves the day. You are leading a team through the DMAIC process. You're leading them to the problem-solving process. There's a couple of things going on here. One, you're drawing on their knowledge of the process. Regardless of your education, regardless of your longevity, nobody knows the job better than the person who does it every day. That's obvious on its face. We tend to forget that. We tend to say, oh, well, they're just line workers. They're just biologists. But in reality, they have to do it every day. So they understand some insights in the process that nobody else does, right? So you're leading them through that process. One, to draw on their knowledge and experience with the process. But two, you're leading them through DMAIC, and they are learning what's a Pareto chart? What's a time series plot? How do I understand this data? What's gauge R&R? Why does it matter to us, right? They're understanding that based on tools you are teaching them because that's what you're doing with the team. So it's kind of an interchange. And as a result, you're increasing the knowledge base for the entire organization, right? So you got to make sure that you recognize you're not responsible. It's you and the team and the champion are responsible. Now, this leads us to another point. When you get ready to have your first team meeting, that means you had to recruit your team members. You have to identify the team members and you have to have them recruited. Don't recruit your own team members. Let the champion recruit them. Imagine I go to 3 people and say, Bob, Sue, Pat, Chris, will you be on my team? I'm working this really difficult problem and I need your expertise. And they're all like, yeah, sure, we'll help out. You're a nice enough guy. I'll be on your team. Sure. Right. But once they get a competing obligation, once they're called to a different meeting, once they get a different project to work on, they're going to ditch you like a bad habit. That's just natural, right? But if their boss came to them and said, Gutham is going through some advanced training. I need you to work with Gutham to solve this problem. You are all equally responsible. That completely changes the dynamic. They can't just blow off the meeting because they got something else to do because they're responsible too. And if the champion holds them accountable, Gutham, it makes it a lot easier for you to hold team meetings, collect data, and instigate change. You guys understand that it's a minor thing, and this is kind of a best practice in my opinion. It's somewhere in there, but it's a lot better to let the champion recruit than it is for you to recruit. Everybody understand? You can help identify, absolutely, but let the champion do the actual, I need you to work on this project speech. Fair enough? All right. Then you have the team members, okay? The team members kind of fit into 3 categories. The process experts, right? They know what the process is about. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But they're participating, they're helping develop the solution. Oh, by the way, they're helping maintain the solution when you're done. Many of us have had experience where we walk into a process and say, here, if you just do this, you'll solve your problem. And as soon as you walk away, people look at that and go, I ain't doing that, right? But if the team helped you come up with that, they're much more likely to implement it and sustain it. So you want to make sure you're leveraging that idea and let the team help come up with a solution, right? Now, team members fit in 3 broad categories. The process experts are the people who do it every day. The technicians, the clerks, the associates, the whatever you call them, right? The process owners are often the mid-level owners, like the team lead or the shift lead or the supervisor on the floor. And then you have subject matter experts, people that will come in, and the subject matter experts are not really core team members. They only come in when they're needed. They may have expertise in how the equipment works. They may have expertise in that government policy. They may have expertise that is outside of what the regular team does. You may pull them in temporarily to help you, address certain things, but they wouldn't be a core team. The core team is primarily the process experts and the owners. Everybody good? All right. So what I would like you to do now, my assumption at this point, Andy, is that you've already got a project in mind. You're already thinking about what you're going to be working on your project, right? What I would like you to do is I'd like you to find the file roles worksheet template, right? Now you could do this on a regular piece of paper too, using the template, but the files, it was handed out, or it was what you downloaded earlier in the files and templates. See if you can't locate the file. Somebody give me a thumbs up or something if you found the file, you got it open. So Gutham's got it. All right, thank you, Andy. And tell me how to pronounce your name. Naali, Nali,
Yeah, it is Nigeli, like jelly.
Nigeli. Is that
Yeah,
right?
got it.
Nigeli? All right.
Yes.
Guys, I will absolutely do my best to pronounce your name correctly. I can't even pronounce Athon correctly. Is it Athon,
Don't worry.
Athon or Athon? I mean, and it's my own last name, so I don't even know. But Andy, I got that one. Right. That's like Jim. It's hard to mess up Jim. So Najali, is that right? Najali or Najeli?
Nigeli, like jelly. Nigeli.
Najeli. All right. I'm going to do my best to remember that. If I botch it up, feel free to correct me. Fair enough? You
Yes.
won't hurt my feelings. Remember, I'm a boy from South Georgia.
No worries.
That'll make it a lot easier, right? But Najeli's got it. Najeli. I'm going to do it. Najeli's got it. All right. I would like you to go during the exercise. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I would like you to identify who you are. That should be easy, right? Identify who your master black belt is. I'll be filling that role. So 2 of the roles are already filled out. Who is your champion? I'd like you to think through who is the champion. Make sure they fit the criteria we talked about. They're responsible for the process. They have the P&L responsibility. The people work for them, right? Make sure you know your champion is. And then identify 2 or 3 or 4 team members. It may be by name or it may be by role. That's fine. But what do you think? Who do you think? That right now is not as important as my real takeaway is you know who your champion is. Everybody good? That's really the biggest takeaway of this whole thing, because you should know who you are. You think, therefore you are, so you're good with that, right? But you should know who your champion is. I don't want to do 10 minutes. Let's make it 5. Make sure you know your champion is. If you got questions, I'm here. Otherwise, I'm just going to turn everybody loose for 5 minutes to fill this out, and I'll ask for questions at the end. All right? So let me set the timer. I'll put that up, and then I will answer questions, which you are welcome to ignore if you're working on your own thing. Gotham, is that correct? Gotham?
Gotham, like the
Gotham
city.
Like Gotham City. Okay.
Yep.
I'll try. I might miss it, but remind me. Okay, Gotham. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, so I work very closely with manufacturing at my workplace, and most of my team members would be from manufacturing. And one of the questions that we always get for process improvement initiatives like this is how much time does it take for this resource to support this
For like a team member off the floor?
For a team member, yeah. So
1 to 2 hours a week at the most, right? Unless they have to do things like data collection, which is an intermittent activity, right? That might be different, but usually you're probably going to have a meeting a week, and they're often an hour for each meeting. So that would be reasonable. What some people will do, Gotham, is they will have meetings in the off shifts. So like if you're working 2 shifts, they'll have the meeting immediately at the end of their pre-shooting shift. Which the good thing is it doesn't interrupt the production flow. The bad thing is you might have to pay overtime, right? But again, navigate that with your champion to figure out the best way to do it, right? Also, there's a whole section in the material about meeting management, and that's a key thing to getting meetings done quickly. People will go in with no agenda, and it takes forever to have a meeting. So there's a section on that you'll see. Fair?
Thank you.
Okay, so primary outcome of this exercise is to make sure you know who your champion is, really. And to begin to, to do a preliminary effort at identifying who the team members are. You may already know, you already have a really good idea of it. This may be the first time you've thought about it. But in any case, you're going to need to refine that. And that's something you'll do at the beginning of next week, right? Or even today. Start identifying those team members, make sure your champion's on board. And as we start engaging with a champion, one of the first things the champion is going to do is sign your project charter. I'll talk about that more in the next section, right? So we talked about this idea of identifying your team members, identifying your champion, right? Moving on, there's a couple of things we need to be aware of, and that's this idea of a stakeholder analysis. Now, this is one of those tools that not everybody's going to use. And in fact, most people do not use this. They pay attention to it, they're aware of it, but they may not use this tool. You may need to use this tool. It depends on how cross-functional and widespreading your change is, right? What is a stakeholder? Anybody who has an interest in the process you're working on, right? It could be, obviously, the champion is the key stakeholder, right? They're the ones, but the people who do the process are the stakeholders, the customers of the process, the suppliers of the process, the owners of the process. Anybody else who is touched by this process could be a stakeholder. It could be HR, finance may be a stakeholder, right? But the idea is to identify who the stakeholders are and find out where they are relative to the project you're about to engage in. Okay, so we could take people and look at their buy-in, and you could put them into different categories, right? Now, we start with owners and executives. These are the people that we're worried about who are stakeholders. But where are they relative to this project? Are they strong supporters? Yes, I can't wait to change this. We've been needing to work on this a long time. I'm really fervent that we need to fix this. Or the other extreme of, dude, why are you looking at my stuff? Nothing's wrong with us. It's those people over there, and they're really resistant to changing anything, right? Generally speaking, though, Rena, you don't get the extremes. What you get is people that are marginally supporters or marginally blockers, right? They're marginally supporters in that, Gotham, as long as you don't inconvenience me too much, I'm willing to support your project. Or as long as it doesn't affect me too much negatively, I'm cool with it, right? That's where a lot of people are sitting. Some people are blockers, and it's not that they're like really actively, engaged against you. It's more that, I think it's fine. We don't need to mess with this, or, work on it. Just don't bother me and I'll be cool. Right. And they're kind of like we even have neutral. People are like, whatever. Nobody's ever whatever. Right. They're whatever until you ask them to do something. And then you find out, are they supportive or blocking? So it's just interesting. You really don't have the extremes, and you seldom have somebody that's neutral. They usually fit in the other two categories. Nevertheless, we call it a continuum where it's going all the way from strong blocker all the way to strong supporter. We need to figure out where they are. Are they at least not actively going to oppose us, right? Or do we need them to be strong supporters? Your champion needs to be a strong supporter, obviously, right? Team members, as long as they're not actual strong blockers, we can try to win them over. But once you identify who they are, where they are, and where you need them to be, then you got to figure out how you can influence them. Now, Dom, we can always say, you will do this because I said so. Yeah. And in the short term, that works, but that's long term the least effective. We're better off if we can win them over through this is called the paint strategy. And it has 5 different elements. You may choose just one of these, you may choose more than one, but the first is persuade. Some people are very rationally based, very logically minded. You show them data, you explain to them the effect in terms of impact on the customer, expenses, impact our own internal expenses, the defects we're dealing with, the rework time. Some people will be influenced by logic and data and rationale. Other people are influenced by more emotional approaches, right? We have established a vision. Wouldn't it be nice if the customer didn't have to deal with this? Wouldn't it be nice if we could satisfy the customer the first time through and have them be, net promoters of our business, right? So you have that active approach. You could involve them. Well, that's one of the things we're going to do with team members, Rena, is have them actively being involved in the team, and they have a voice in what direction we take, how we solve the problem, and so forth. Involving them really gets people, right, to start supporting a project. You might negotiate. Hey, you help me with this, and I'll help you with that. One hand washes another routine. Or, of course, you could resort to the tell, right? You will do this because I'm the boss and I said so. And that's effective short term, but it usually is not the best effective, right? Are people emotional or are people rational? And the answer is yes. We're all both, right? So a useful technique will apply both or more within one of these, right? But again, it depends on what you're dealing with, depending on who you're dealing with, it depends on what you think they're going to be persuaded by, right? To do the best job of winning them over to your way of thinking. Okay. Guys, this is not manipulative. That's not what we're not trying to manipulate people or go, surreptitiously. It's just how do you get them to understand why you're working the project, right? And there's different ways you can approach that. Okay. But so we figure out where they are, which is the X. We figure out where we need them to be, which is the O. And then we determine what strategy are we going to deploy to try to win them over. Do we show them a whole business case with data and historic performance and impact financially? Do we go and try to appeal to them, explaining how well the improved process is going to benefit everybody, easier to do, cause less stress, more time to be at home with your kids? I mean, how are you going to approach it? There is no right way. You got to tailor that communication to your audience. Fair enough. Everybody good? So again, not everybody's going to do a stakeholder analysis, but the more widespread your project is and the more people it touches, you need to do this ahead of time. This is not a top secret document that you hide away in a drawer, but by the same token, you don't go put it up on the bulletin board in the main part of the office either, because nobody wants to walk by and say, I'm not a blocker. Why they got my name? You know what I mean? It's really more of a tool for you and your champion to kind of evaluate where you're at, right? And just assess, do I need to go do some extra work before I really get into the project deep? Okay. And a companion to this idea is the idea of a RACI matrix or a RACI diagram, right? RACI is basically taking all the people, stakeholders, if you will, that have some association with the project and determine where they are functionally. Are they responsible for doing the process? Are they accountable? That is, they're held accountable if the process goes bad. Are they someone you just need to consult and tell, hey, I might get your opinion on this, and kind of talk to them and kind of consult with them? Or is it someone just going to tell them, hey, guys, this is what we're doing. I'm giving you fair warning. You understand the distinction between the four, right? There is no right or wrong here, but one of the things that is suggested, there is only one person that's accountable. You may have multiple people who are responsible for doing it, but one person is held to account if it goes bad, right? The boss, the owner of the process, maybe the champion, right? So you'll notice this is just an example. This is, we were doing an old tank maintenance project. I did some work in a refinery years ago. There are several things that we could change, MGC codes and a refinery tank list, a program checklist. We had all these different groups that were associated with these projects: oils planning, scheduler, finance, corporate tax, right? Some of the things we worked like the MGC code, just about everybody had some touch in it. Some people were responsible. Corporate tax was responsible for applying those codes, right? The project planner was the one that was held accountable if things were done incorrectly. You had several that you needed to find to discuss with it and get their opinions. What's the best way for us to structure these codes to cover the broadest area and be more specific or whatever? And there's other people that just need to be told this is the way we're going to do it. You guys good with the idea? And you've got other places where the person responsible is the only person accountable. There is only one person that's doing this or one group that's doing this, and they're accountable for it as well. And you have others like this one where multiple people are consulted, but only one group is responsible. Sometimes you have multiple groups responsible, but it's just a useful technique to think about, who do I need to tell about ahead of time? And I'm going to just throw another thing at you. You go out and you start changing a process that's going to change the way people behave. It's a good idea to let HR know what you're doing ahead of time, right? If you're going to go out and start making changes to a process that influence how people behave, and you're a union shop, you need to be talking to the union before you make any changes, right? It's just good business practice, and it's smart. Part of that is because of this. The person who frames the argument tends to win the argument, right? It's a well-known, what's the word? It's a well-known saying in debate, right? For example. But and if you've had children, I had 3 girls, right? And one of the girls comes in, she hit me. Your initial response is to go defend this poor helpless child whose sister has victimized her and been mean to her. But if you do that once or twice, you realize you made a big mistake. You learn to go ask questions. What happened? And you often find that the person who complains is the one who actually started the whole thing, right? And they're trying to get in first so they don't get in trouble. So it's the same sort of thing with this. Make sure that you're the first person that HR has heard it from. You're the first person that the union has heard it from. They don't hear it from their members complaining, or they don't hear from an employee saying, it's unsafe, we're all going to die. It's like, no, I know what you're talking about. I'm already familiar with it. I've already seen it. It's not that big a deal. You follow me in the idea, right? So even if you don't do a RACI or a stakeholder, it's a good idea to think about, do I need to tell HR what we're doing? Do I need to consult with engineering? Do I need to talk to maintenance? I'm fixing to buy a new piece of equipment. They need to be aware of it before you buy it. You don't want to have it the first time they've heard about it. It's when it shows up on the dock and they've got to install it. You know what I mean? Why did you buy something that was 440 volts? We don't even have 440 volts in the factory. 220 is the most we can do. He's like, oops, right? You don't want to be in that situation. So again, who do you need to consult ahead of time? Everybody good? Again, do you need these tools? No, they're really more on an as needed basis. I just wanted to make you familiar with them. Some of you have been using racing matrices for years. This is not the first time you've heard of it, right? Some of you, maybe the first time you've ever heard of the tool. All right. Any questions or thoughts before I continue? I'll take that as a no. And so I'm going to move on into a tool called a SIPOC diagram.
I do have a question.
Yes, please.
Yes. How different is the Six Sigma project from like a waterfall project as defined by PMI?
The biggest difference in that I could identify, that I could tell you, is this. In a PMI regulated project, you already generally know what you're going to have to do the project. We're implementing a new policy. We're switching over to a new software. We're implementing a new piece of equipment. We're moving to a new facility. The end result is already known. Does that make sense? Right. So you've already got an idea of what the timeline. And so the purpose of, at least in my limited understanding, in my practice, the ultimate purpose of PMI is to plan out all the activities that are going to be required in the timeline to get a particular task accomplished. And then how do you deal with all the contingencies? What happened if this bumps out? That could bump out 5 days. It's not on the critical path. It won't influence us all. That's on the critical path. That bumps out. The whole thing shifts. How am I going to mitigate that? Right. That's the PMI project management approach. We're deploying some of that, but our project is much more open-ended. Because all we know right now is what the problem is. And that's why in the project selection workbook, we started qualifying projects: unknown root cause, unknown solution. I'll develop that idea more in a moment, but that's probably the major difference. We don't know what the solution, we don't know what the end result looks like. We know it's better, but we don't know what we got to do to make it better. Does that make sense?
It's closer to like an agile project.
Say it again.
It's closer to like an agile or Scrum project.
It's very, very similar, right? And even then, it's more I would argue it's more similar to Scrum, right? And in summary, without getting too far into it, Scrum is a tool. Agile is a tool set for software development specifically. Scrum is more applicable to any design environment. At least that's the way that I've seen it deployed, right? But Scrum, the term is taken from rugby, and they talk about you have 10 design engineers and they're working on 16 projects, and as a result, nothing's getting done. Everybody's shuffling and working on this a little bit, working on this a little bit, working on this bit, and nothing's progressing. So what Scrum does says, let's stop, let's get everybody together, let's identify the top three things we need to be working on. Let's dedicate everybody's resources on that. Let's program that out, and then let's sprint for a week. And then we'll check back in a week, so we're at restructure, maybe drop one off, add one in. But what it does is it narrows our focus. So yeah, it's more like that, but still there's some significant differences. The end result is we don't know what the solution looks like, right? But in both Scrum and Agile, you pretty much know what it needs to accomplish, which is similar to us. But the sequence of work is more known in Scrum and Agile than it is in this, right? This is much more open-ended. We just have a problem. It takes us 16 days to do something. It ought to take us 3 days, right? We got to go reduce the timeline. There's a myriad of reasons why that could happen. You may have bottlenecks in the process. You may have lengthy approval processes. You could have unreliable equipment that causes breakdowns. You may have people who are traveling and are not available. I mean, who knows, right? So it's similar, but different. I would argue this is much more open-ended than a PMI project. And it's more open-ended, not completely, but more open-ended than a Scrum or Agile, a sprint, if that makes sense. Right? So like implementing a new piece of equipment, that's more Scrum or Agile, right? Because we already know what we got to do. It's just now what's the timeline and how do I make sure that certain things are done at a certain time? It's almost PMI, if you will. But what we're doing way more open-ended because we don't know. All we know is we're going through DMAIC and it has to be done in 5 months. So now it's like, it's what we discover along the way is going to influence our next step. Does that make sense? Yeah, now, guys, I appreciate challenges or other insights if you've got them on that. But that's the way I have understood it. That's the way because I've worked the other projects too, but that's what I see as the difference, PMI as well. Yes, Gotham.
Yeah. So Jim, in general, is it better to just because I have a couple of projects or more than two to kind of evaluate what's best fit. Is it better to just go with something it's a problem, but you don't know exactly what the root cause is, or you don't even know what you're going to find out?
That's ideal. That's the best type of project.
And in those cases, when I'm into the analysis phase of the root cause, and if I find out the savings are not, to the level that I've expected, is that a problem for getting this?
As long as we have got a reasonable assessment up front that we're going to generate the savings we think we're going to generate, right? Some of that stuff is very well known. We can document it and say this project's worth, $480,000. Okay, we only saved 150. Cool, right? But sometimes we look at a project and say, I think it's going to be worth 150. And as you start digging into the data, you realize, actually, we've been collecting the data wrong. Our finance system was misguided. And it was focusing, this project's only worth 40,000, right? I'm not going to beat you up on that. I'm not going to go back and say, oh, sorry, you didn't graduate. I'm not going to do that, right? As long as we've got reasonable estimates up front and I'm comfortable with that, then I won't beat you up, because it does happen, right? I mean, that's not the goal and that's not what we want. But sometimes that's just the nature of the business. And I'm going to throw this out too, just as a side note, since you brought it up. The amount of money you save in a project is a function of two things: how bad the process is to begin with and what your volumes are, right? So I've worked projects where the process is so broken, all you got to do is go wave a stick around and you can solve the problem, or at least make it better, because it is so bad, right? And you can save a lot of money on a process like that. I've also been in situations where we made a 0.5% improvement and it saved $400,000 because there was so much volume and the product has so much value. So Gotham, all I can tell you is, as long as we do our due diligence up front, we've got support from finance that says, yeah, this problem is worth X amount of $100,000. If you work through it at the end, you find out, well, we misunderstood, or we couldn't make as big an impact because we thought it was just one or two root causes. It's like 18 subcategories of causes, and we can only affect 3 of them in this project. I'm not going to beat you up on it. We will learn more as we do the project, right? But guys, to answer your other question, the goal is that you're working a project where you don't know the root cause, because that's the learning. That's what we're doing. That's really what we've got to do in real life. You're faced with an issue. How do I solve it? Okay, is it a cycle time issue or a defect issue? Now, Rena, if it's a behavioral issue, that's a different problem. If it's because management just doesn't know how to manage, that's a different problem, right? Those already have known solutions. Those already have things we can work through with HR and organizational structure. But when we're dealing with like a procedure that does not generate satisfactory outcome, then that's more what we're after, because that's what we're trying to look at. We're looking at process improvement. How do we make processes better, right? And here, just another side note, bad processes beat good people all the time, the majority of the time, right? Some people can muscle through it and still get good results. But if you have a crummy process, and organizations are full of crummy processes, you have a crummy process, you're going to get crummy outcome, no matter how good your people are. And oh, by the way, if you don't start fixing the process, you lose your good people, because they go work somewhere where they have better processes. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but Najali, the idea is, how would we take our entire business? How would I take our subset of our process and franchise it, right? When you buy a franchise, a McDonald's franchise, a Chick-fil-A franchise, a Starbucks, Starbucks doesn't really franchise, but when you buy a franchise, what are you buying? You're buying access to their materials that they purchase to standardize the food taste, right? But you're really buying access to their processes. Now you have combined advertising, you have store layout and the way it's supposed to look, but you're buying their processes so that you can replicate what they do. So part of our mindset is, how could I take what we do? We're producing reagents, or we're writing insurance policies, or whatever it is. How would I take that and franchise it to somebody? That is, how would we have processes that are so robust? If you follow these 18 steps, you will get the same results we got. Does that make sense? So Gotham, that's what we're trying to do. How do we standardize our processes so that we could franchise them? Not saying that anybody here is going to go into the franchise business. I'm not saying that, but that's the mentality. That's what we're trying to do. That makes our processes so robust that we could franchise them. Everybody good? Because really, when you buy a franchise, you're buying access to common, support, common advertising, common raw materials, but you're really buying the processes so that you can generate the same results that they're generating. right? And then you have people that their job is to go around to all their franchisees and make sure they're following the processes that they sold them. Because you know what people do? They start modifying stuff, and usually it's to the detriment of the overall organization. Yeah. Najali, you had a question? Okay.
No.
Okay, you unmuted. I didn't know if that was a signal to, hey, listen up, pal. All right. Let's continue. And I'm going to talk about a tool. And guys, again, ask questions anytime. That's good. Good conversations. And I want to make sure that I'm as open as I can be. And oh, by the way, what's an expert? An expert is either a former leaking faucet or the person who knows more than anybody else in the room. You guys good? From a certain point of view, I'm an expert. But here's the thing, and I would recommend you to read about this. I would recommend go and look it up. There's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Has anybody heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Cool. All right. So, Hassan, you kind of have an idea what it is. The Dunning-Kruger effect is this. If I was to build a graph like this, and this is confidence, and this is knowledge. People who have a little bit of knowledge are often more confident in what they know than people who are experts and been doing it for years. Because of this reason, the more you know, the more you don't know. Right? The more you learn, the more you realize how much there is to learn. You could literally fill a library full of books with stuff people don't know. In fact, they do that all the time. That's what a library is, right? But it's interesting that people who know just a little bit of subject are very, very confident how much they know. But then the more they learn, their confidence begins to deteriorate. And then people who are really experts in a field often are less confident than the people who know just a little bit about it. Because the people who know just a little bit don't know how much they don't know. You guys good? Have you ever studied epigenetics? Anybody ever heard of epigenetics? Exactly. You go start studying epigenetics and you realize this is way more complicated. DNA is way more complicated than I had any idea. Genetics is not DNA that goes reads a little segment that becomes your eye color. Genetics change over time. They're actually finding out that your habits can be passed on to your children genetically. You can actually not modify your DNA, but modify the structure of your DNA, not the letters in the DNA, but which one's expressed and which ones don't. And then I've done some personal study and all this stuff. I realized I don't know nothing about that. The more I learn, the more I realize I didn't know, because you just start digging in and it's like, oh my goodness, this is so. That's it. Hey, so I realized I don't know nothing about epigenetics, right? It's easy to be an expert on something when you don't know nothing about it. Then you start. So with all that said, guys, I'm learning with you. I've done it since 1995, right? I've seen it applied in numerous ways in lots of industries. I'm still learning, right? I'm still finding stuff out, but I do see certain principles. I do see certain things. I will make recommendations and push. A lot of the projects you work are very similar to other stuff. So I don't know what the solution is, but I've got a better idea of where to go look. Is that fair? Right. I don't know, but usually I can say, you need to go think about this, you need to look at this, I would express this, I would talk to these people, I would build this, I would use this tool. That's the goal of coaching, right? But still, to your point, Gotham, it's a search for the unknown, right? You're trying to figure out what is the actual root cause and what's the best way for me to address it in my business environment. Everybody good? So what do we start with? You got to start with the team, okay? And when you start working with your team, you're going to start with an assumption that they all know the process. Now, if you ever watched the show How It's Made, or you ever heard of the show How It's Made? You ever heard of this, a Canadian show? And they'll go through and show, how do they make candles? We'll show you after the commercial break. And they'll come back and they'll go through the whole process where they start with, paraffin, and they'll melt it down, and they'll put, flavoring in it, or they'll put fragrance in it or whatever. They may even put a little extra stuff, glitter or whatever, and then they'll form it into the shape. They'll put in the wick, and then they'll package it and they'll ship it off. You're like, cool, that's how they make candles. Okay, cool. Well, then they have it for everything. Okay, in a manufacturing environment like a candle making factory, you can go into the factory and watch the individual steps and see how it's produced. And a lot of times people who work in those environments already have a general idea of how it works because they've seen the individual steps. I mean, go to a bakery. You see the flour, you see the dough, you see the oven, you see the bread. It's pretty easy to figure out. Doesn't mean I can do it, but at least I know the main steps. Everybody good with that? You start working in an office environment, sometimes you have people who, and this is true in manufacturing too, but it's more prevalent in office environments. People don't know where the stuff comes from, and they don't know what happens to it when they're done with it, right? All they know is their step. And I see this all the time. You have people whose job it is to create reports and generate output. What do they use with the output? I don't know. Who does it go to? It goes to this list of 8 departments. What do they do with it? I have no idea, right? Where do you get all the information you use to report? It comes out of that software. How does it get into the software? I don't know. What does that measure mean? I'm not really sure, but I know if I calculate it this way, it gives me this result. That's very common, right? Where you have office processes where people are working a very detailed, structured, and difficult but they don't know where the information comes from, and they don't know where it goes when they're done with it. So the purpose of this tool we're about to go into is to level set the team. All right. So I would like you to think this out. A SIPOC diagram is not a problem-solving tool per se, right? And you can solve problems with it, but it's not a problem-solving tool. It's not the intent. The intent of the SIPOC is to make sure everybody on the team is on the same sheet of music, right? They all know where we are in the songbook, what page we're on, what verse we're on. They know, right? That is to say, they know what's a supplier, they know what's a customer, they know what's an input, they know what's an output, and they know the main steps in the process. Okay, so we're going to take a break. When we come back from break, we're going to talk through and build SIPOC diagrams, right? But remember, you got to remember what's going to it. It is not a problem-solving tool. It's a way for us to get the team on the same level, to make sure everybody knows the main steps, and they begin to understand what is a supplier and what is a customer, because all of us are suppliers and customers, right? We always think the customer is the end person who buys my product and pays us money. They are a customer. They're not the only customer. Any process you work in, if you think about it, you are my customers, right? I have to deliver information and coaching so you're successful in your project and hopefully develop skills that will last you your career, right? The college is my customer. Oh, by the way, the college is my supplier and you're my supplier. So it's funny, you fit both roles because you're supplying with the information about your project so I can help coach you through. You're supplying me with feedback so I can know how to improve the course, right? The course is providing, the college is providing the structure and the platform on which, so that's a supplier and customer. And that's what we're going to detail here. So let's understand the main steps in the process. That was part of what I was kicking off this morning to make sure you know, where do I start? Where do I get information? What does Canvas look like? What are the weekly expectations, right? And I learned that first couple of courses, I didn't do that. And because I thought it was, because I'd done it so much, I just thought it was self-explanatory. And you find out, no, I need to kind of talk that through, right? Oh, you know what else I should be doing? I should be recording it when I talk it through. So I'm still working on that one, right? And that's why I need your help to make sure I record. All right, with that said, let's do 6. When we come back, we're going to pick up and talk about a SIPOC diagram. Everybody good? Everybody okay? All right, I'll see you back in 6. Thank you. Is it how do you pronounce your name? Rojan? Rohan? Rojasan? I don't think I can guess that one.
My name is Natalia. Rojas is my last name.
Oh, you want to change? Can you change your name to Natalia?
Yeah, I'll try to figure out how to do that.
Right. Go to your picture and right mouse click on your picture, and it'll say rename. Do you see it? So
rename.
Okay,
got it.
I know it sounds complicated, and you're like, oh, that was a lot easier than I expected it to be.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So it's Natalia.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll try that one. I'm terrible with pronouncing some of
You go by Natalie if it makes it a little bit easier.
Oh, Natalia is great. Is it Eastern European or Russian?
No, I'm South American, Colombia.
Ooh, oh yeah, really? I've been to Peru. Yeah. That's the only place in South America I've been.
I never made it to Peru, but hope to someday.
Yeah, have you been into the Amazon at all? Been on the river?
No, I'm from the northern part of Colombia.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
How long was Peru?
I actually was in Lima and what is the name of the place? Anyway, the place that used to be the capital of the Inca. I'm blanking on it.
Machu Picchu?
Well, I've been to Machu Picchu too, and to the city, but there's Cusco.
Oh yeah.
I knew it was C something, but I couldn't recall what it was. Anyway, wow, what a beautiful country. And I'd like to go spend some time. I'm interested in Native American culture, so that's one of the reasons we went there. We got to study the Mahote people, and I don't know if you've ever seen the stirrup pots and all that. I'd like to go. I've read a lot about the civilizations that existed in the Amazon. We think the Amazon is this unspoiled rainforest, and in fact, that whole place was at one point civilized with cities, and this whole place is on the Amazon. I've read about where they have like 5 foot deep of very rich soil that they made the soil and implanted it there, and they have huge. It's all overgrown, but at the time it was a very well defined and well developed civilization. But
Yeah.
it's interesting how civilizations rise and fall and completely disappear.
I know, right?
So I'd like to go there and experience that, right? But then again, you got to worry about, getting attacked by by natives who carry you off in the woods, and right. So it's just
we had a friend that I think he was doing some missionary work in Ecuador and sleeping out in the tents and like in the jungle.
Yeah.
Sounds interesting. Not for me though.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea. I definitely like cement and I like a roof.
Yeah, I like all the diseases and vaccines and so on. But
so you do Spanish is your native language?
yeah,
You do
I've
not
been here for about 18 years.
Okay, you don't have a thick accent. Like a lot of times you can tell Spanish speaking by the way you pronunciate certain words. You don't.
Yeah.
It doesn't carry. That's why I was saying even Natalia, it almost sounds like you almost you don't have an Eastern European accent. It just sounds. But I don't. It's amazing how much I don't know. And is it Patrice? Is that correct, Patrice? Can you unmute for me? That's.
Yeah.
If you turn off her camera.
I'm just not gonna let you see me at all. That way you won't have to. Is it Patrice? Is that correct? I know I have more trouble with it than you know. I've been doing it for years. I still can't figure Zoom out. But anyway, I know you guys got to take a break. I don't mean to steal your break. I just so. All right, welcome back. We're going to resume with a conversation about the SIPOC diagram. So I touched on that a little bit before we went to break. And again, let me reiterate. SIPOC is not really a problem-solving tool. It's more of a team leveling tool. And I'll explain what that means more as we get into it. Okay. SIPOC is an acronym for Supplier Input Process Output Customer, right? And basically, it's a tool to help us understand and help the team understand what is a supplier. A supplier is someone who provides us inputs, right? Finally, what is a customer? What is a customer? It's someone who receives the output of our process. And then you've got the actual process itself. Now, I'd like you to take note, and this has been built this way intentionally. The suppliers give us input and the customers receive output. We're not worried about which suppliers give us which input at which step. That's out of scope at this point, right? We just want to know, in general, from a macro level, who are our main suppliers for this process and what are the main inputs into the process. And by the same token, what are the main outputs? Of course, let's say you're in a manufacturing environment. The main output is the thingamabob that we're manufacturing, whether it's a relay, whether it's a pump, whether it's an automobile. That's the output. Our output could be, let's say we're Google, the output would be your search results. Or that would be one, the customer could be the person searching. The customer could also be the people who are paying a premium that have their name placed higher in the list of potential solvers of whatever the thing is you're looking for. So they may have a couple of different outputs. So the output is just basically what is coming out of your process. By the way, your customer may be a regulatory agency. Your customer could even be a software package. Okay, it doesn't have to be the actual person who pays for your product at the end, but that's what we're trying to relate. And then on a separate note, but on the same diagram, what are the main steps in the process? We're trying to graph out from a very high level, what are the main steps, right? No more than 8 steps. We'd like to keep it to 5, if at all possible. We have a clear start point. That's where we're going to start looking at the process. We have a clear end point where we're going to stop looking at the process. So, Rena, from your perspective, if you're working in an area that you supervise, that means the start and stop point are going to be within that area. Or it could be when it's delivered to you from a preceding place, or when you offhand it or hand it off to another place, right? But your boundaries are going to be within your realm of control. Same it is with any champion. The boundaries of your SIPOC should be within the realm of control of your particular champion, which means that if you realize, well, the boundaries should be a lot wider, maybe I need a different level of champion. Okay. But it's often efficient to start with the customer. Who's the person who's receiving the output? Oh, by the way, who's the customer who's receiving the output that's complaining about this thing that we're doing, whatever that process is, right? So recognizing this is a takeaway that you're going to try to communicate with the team. The customer can, of course, be external. It's the final person who's receiving the output of our process. But every step in a process is a supplier to the next step, and they're a customer of the preceding step. Right. So you've got this idea of customers are outside the organization and inside the organization. Right. So when you're addressing a problem, you're usually addressing with some dissatisfaction as it affects the customer. Right. Whether it's an internal customer or external customer. So when we list the customers, we'd like to start with the one that is dissatisfied right now. Gotham, it could just be the profitability of a process. We're generating a process and we're not making enough money on it, either because we have too many defects, we don't have good material utilization, we aren't fast enough to satisfy the customer's expectation, our results aren't optimized to what the customer wants, whatever it is, right? So you may be dealing with a variety of different customers, but you want to pick the one that is most affected right now, which could be internal, right? And you may work down to the ultimate customer if it's not the same person. Right, but you and your champion need to be identifying who is the primary customer that is driving this project, right? And it could be 2 or 3, but usually there's a singular customer that's driving it, whether it's profitability or whether it's a customer complaint or what have you. So it could be things like, the paying customer who buys your product or your service or your information, government regulators, transportation providers, like those are all external. It could be internal, like if you're manufacturing something, you have to send it over to final assembly. They're a customer of your sub-assembly process. The accounting department is a customer of whatever your outputs are that determine how profit. They're going to use that to determine profitability. Even a software package can be a customer of a process because you've got to put in information to track it through, to move it physically, or whatever the case is. We'll talk more about customers in an async section called Voice of the Customer, VOC. Right. Then you have the output. What is the output the customer is receiving? One customer may receive multiple outputs, or you may have several customers receiving the output. It just the same output. It just depends. But recognize outputs are typically one of three categories or some combination of those three. An actual physical product that you're manufacturing, or a service that you're providing, or information that you're providing. You may be providing a report. You may be providing a survey. We're in the thick of political season. So there are people who are providing surveys with results of what the predicted results are going to be of a election. You may be providing a service like a transportation service or an analytical service or a staffing service, right? Where you're not providing, or you may be manufacturing and providing an actual tangible product. Those are general outputs that you're doing. So you'd like to identify who are they going to, right? So what you'll do is you'll wind up aligning your customers with what outputs they're receiving. If you're a magazine printer, the magazine is an output. If you're recording, you have recordable accidents that you have to report to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, that might be a customer. Or even, that might be an output. Or even the packaging. You manufacture a product, but you have to palletize it. Well, then the shipper is a customer of how you determine to palletize. They don't want the pallet falling apart. They don't want it breaking apart. They don't want it to be too high where it doesn't fit inside the truck, obviously. It could be subassemblies, it could be financials, it could be data sets that you're putting into a system. And that leads us to when we're making a process better, we're doing one of four things: better, faster, safer, lower cost, right? Usually it's the first two, better or safer, but it could be environmental health and safety, which is around safety, right? It's around the output of safety. We don't want to pollute the environment. We don't want to injure people. We don't want to damage equipment, right? So we want to better, faster, safer, lower cost. Okay. Then we get to the process, right? Notice that intentionally the process, these are vertical in their alignment. This is horizontal. We're not trying to tie a customer to a step in a process. We're not trying to try a supplier input to a step. It's just general suppliers, general inputs, general customers, general outputs, and then the process, right? This is intended to be, and you'll hear me talk about as we go through different levels of, you can process map at a very high level, right? A 10,000 foot view, if you will. Imagine flying over a neighborhood at 10,000 foot. You can see all the roads. You can see where the highway is. You can see where the Walmart is in association at a very high level. But if you flew over at 1,000 feet, you wouldn't be able to see that. But you will be able to see the individual houses in the neighborhood, what type of cars they have in the driveway, where their driveway is located to their neighbors. If you drove over at 100 foot, you would only be able to see one house. But you could see the shingles on that house, where all the pipes are that come out for vents of the plumbing system and so forth. You'd be able to see all that detail. The higher you are, the less detail, but the broader your scope is. The narrower, the lower you are, the more detail you get, but the narrower your scope is. So a SIPOC is kind of like that higher level. What are the main steps in the process? We want to have the circles at the end to say, where's our start point? You could just write the word start, or you may list the preceding step. That's where it starts. That's where it begins, right? And same thing with the final step, at least within your context. No more than 8 steps. We're not building a process map. This is just a high-level overview of what your process looks like. Now, what's the benefit? For you, the problem solver, now you know the main steps in the process, right? And I'd like you to think about something. If you're responsible, and Rena, I'm gonna pick on you a bit. If you're responsible for managing processes, you should be able to, from memory, do the SIPOC for that process you're responsible for managing. And you know what you see sometimes? Sometimes you see people managing processes and they don't even know what the process is. All they know are the financials on a piece of paper. Now, to some extent, an MBA can manage a process that way. But when it gets to the actual details of the process, a hospital functions a lot differently than a manufacturing environment, works a lot differently than, say, an insurance company. While they're all delivering output, they all have processes, they all generate P&Ls, they all generate income statements and balance sheets, they all function differently. So you need to understand the process if you're going to manage them effectively. So one of the things, and I'm going to introduce the idea here, is when you get ready to do the SIPOC diagram for you personally, you need to go to Gemba, right? Gemba is a Japanese word that means where the work is done. And what it means to us is go see the work yourself. Go walk through the process. Go identify what the steps are. It's good to even take video or take pictures. Nowadays, with these things, it's so easy to get video and get pictures. Back in the old days, you had to have a big VHS thing with all that. Video was really difficult to get. You go back far enough, and it was film. Nowadays, it's easy. Go to see the process yourself. If it's an office process, go sit with the clerk and get them to show you every step they're going through, every computer screen, everything they have to input, all the redundancy, and they'll have to input it here. They have to go over to this software and input it here. You're like, well, we just input it one place. I don't know, but I also got to make a photocopy and turn it on to those people too. It's like, really? Right. So make sure you understand the process. Go see it yourself. Okay. No rework loops, none of that stuff. It's just a high level overview. Right? So you'll notice here, and look at this. Receive mortgage application, process credit report, assemble with application, submit to underwriting, process loan, right? This is a mortgage process, extraordinarily high level. You guys good? If you want to understand what's going on in underwriting, that's a whole detailed process map on its own, right? And consumer loans is way different than commercial loans, right? But they have generally the same steps. But recognize there's a lot going on in each one of those steps. Process money, loan money appropriation. Oh, that's easy enough to say. There's a lot that's going on right there. So this is very high level. Everybody good? And that's what we're building. We just want to make sure we have a good general understanding of what the process looks like. The narrower your process is, the more detail you'll get about each individual step in your SIPOC. The broader your process is, the more vague it's going to be, or the more generalized it's going to be. That's fine. We're going to, guys, believe me, we're going to dig in later to detail process mapping. But at this point, right now, I said a moment ago that a SIPOC diagram is more of a team leveling tool. Remember that, right? It is possible that all of your team already understands who the suppliers' inputs, outputs, and customers are, and they already understand the main steps in the process. Groovy. This is a super easy exercise. It's 10 minutes long, right? But chances are there are people in the process who don't know every step in the process. Where do you work? Underwriting. Where do they get the credit report? I don't know. Equifax, I don't know. What happens to, how do they do the loan appropriation? I don't know that either. Look, dude, I work in underwriting, right? Sometimes you literally have people who all they know is their steps. So we're making sure we have a good comprehensive understanding, right? Then you get the supplier and input. Again, the inputs are generalized, right? Applications, credit reports, criteria check sheet, right? That's all inputs for that loan appropriation process, or that whole mortgage process we talked about, right? And you're going to talk about your supplier. Now, caution. Don't assume your problems are caused by your supplier. I mean, many of them are. Sometimes supplier sends a substandard material or substandard information, or it's riddled with errors, or whatever the case is. But don't assume that it's your supplier. All too often, our suppliers are giving us exactly what we asked for, right? And the problem winds up being we didn't ask for it in the right way. Thus, we didn't get the right stuff. You guys good? Okay. So I didn't know this. I just learned this during COVID because I had a lot of spare time. I started baking and I started making my own bread. It turned into a new hobby, right? I didn't know that you could buy different types of flour. I thought you bought all-purpose flour or general purpose or self-rising flour. I thought that was the extent of it. Oh no. There's flour that's specialized that has more protein in it for bread. There's flour that's specialized, that's ground finer, that's useful for cakes. There's different flour for different purposes. I had no idea, right? So it may be you're trying to make homemade bread with self-rising flour and you're putting in your own yeast. Man, you're begging for problems and it's never going to taste good, right? So you got to use the right type of flour. It needs to have a lot of protein if you want that good mouthfeel, that chewy, part of the bread. I didn't know that. So you could have specified to your customer to send you flour and they're sending you what you asked for. If you wanted high protein flour, specifically bread, we didn't ask for that. All I'm saying is don't just assume it's our suppliers. A lot of times our suppliers are giving us exactly what we asked for. We didn't ask for the right stuff. It happens all the time, right? And that's not to say your suppliers are blameless. They may very well be the cause of all of it. But let's go through our due diligence to verify that and make sure it's not our own fault. Fair enough, all right? And so suppliers could be the customer requesting the loan is not only a supplier, they're also a customer of the application process, because they're providing all the information about, can I repay the loan? What's my collateral? At the end of it, they get the property and they get a repayment schedule, right? So sometimes your supplier is your customer. Think about a hospital. The main supplier is the patient. Who's the main customer of all the services they provide? The patient. So sometimes your supplier is your customer. Sometimes they're totally separate entities. It just depends on your particular business, right? Here's an example of that mortgage application process. I've already touched on the more, but please note, I'm not trying to tie in these into individual steps. We'll do that later if we need to. It's just a general tool. Now, when you go to basic, let's kind of switch gears. If you went to basic training, right, and you go to they take you, they shave your hair off or whatever the case is, and you go through military training, you learn about the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and they teach you how to do basic things like, march in step and how to make a right turn, and they teach you how to handle a weapon or whatever it is the branch of military you go into, right? But one of the goals of the military is to help reduce some of your individuality and learn how to work functionally as a group. Right? When everybody shows up, they're all individuals, they're all their own persons, and you're trying to mold them into a functional group. One of the things that they do is they have drill instructors or training instructors that are particularly annoying and loud and abusive, right? Not physically, not anymore, but verbally, right? But the goal they're trying to do is to get the group to cohere, to despise the training instructor so much they unite in their despising of that. You guys with me? It's just part of the thing. Well, we're not trying to get our team to despise anybody. Don't misunderstand. But we do want to get the team to start working together towards a common goal. Okay. There's a couple of ways to do that. Let them be together long enough and eventually they'll cohere. Or two, getting them, the faster you get them working together, the faster they'll cohere as a group. Probably the first thing you'll do in your very first team meeting after you review your charter is do a SIPOC diagram with your team. Right. But now, Patrice, you're not going to show up with your SIPOC finish and go, look, everybody, look, I did the SIPOC. What do you think? That's not the goal. The goal is to build it from scratch with your team. But Nigeli, it's a good idea to do it on your own before you go to the team, just so you have a pretty good idea of how it works and what it's probably going to look like, more or less. You guys good? And you can guide it better. The more you do it, the easier it gets, right? It's just like anything in life, practice, practice, practice. Right? The more you practice, the better you get at it. Same thing is true with this, right? But remember, we're going in with the team as a team leveling tool. The goal is to get the team to start thinking together towards a common goal, right? Now, Hassan, remember, if you went to a team meeting and you went back on the floor after your team meeting and it's like, hey, what y'all do at that team meeting? I really don't know. Somebody sat there and read me a bunch of information and told me what we're going to do and told me how we're going to improve it. I'm like, oh, well, what did you do? Sat there and listened. That's not a very good team meeting. But if you went to a team meeting, it's like, well, they read this, the boss came in and told us all we're going to work on this problem. Then they left. And then this person, right, Andy, starts going through this thing about a charter and explains what the problem is. I've never seen it verbalized like that. It's kind of interesting. And then we did a cyborg diagram or something. I can't remember what it's called. But we kind of looked at the high level steps in the process. I had no idea those people were doing that step. It never occurred to me, right? So when they walk out of the team meeting, they've actually done something. They put together, they don't know what it is, but they at least got something out of it, right? Quick anecdote. Working in manufacturing that makes, and you'll see some of these examples later on, is a company in Scotland that made the cable that attaches a pilot's helmet to the aircraft. So it has the heads-up display, the intercom, right? It monitors their heartbeat, it monitors their blood pressure all through the helmet. It's really cool stuff, right? Had a little heads-up display inside the helmet and all that. They made the cables and it had like 30 different pins that attached to it. At the end of it, if you've ever looked at a USB cable, for example, you've got a wire here, right? And then you've got the connector there, and you've got this plastic that's molded around the wire. And everybody's had the example where the wire starts pulling out of the connector and it short circuits and it winds up not working anymore. They made those cables, but instead of it being 4 wires like this, it was like 20 or 30 wires. And they did a lot of soldering and all that stuff. The takeaway is they molded that plastic onto that cable. When the guys in the assembly were finished assembling the cable, they would take and wrap it with something called Kapton tape. It looks like copper colored clear Scotch tape. That's what it looks like, right? But it's kind of copper colored. They wrap it around it. They would send it off. The reason they're wrapping is to hold everything in place so that when you mold it, it molds around that Kapton tape. We did a SIPOC and then we actually did some cross training. But as we were doing that exercise, actually, and we actually cross training, put people in there. When they went into that area, the first thing that the people in the molding department did is unwrap the Kapton tape that the assembly people put on and rewrap it a different way. And they never questioned it. It's like, well, that's just what we do. We have to wrap it in a way that we can fit in the mold, right? They started, there's like So the people in the assembly are going, why are you unwrapping that? Says, oh, we have to wrap it this way so our fit in our mold. It's like, we didn't even know that was an issue. We thought you were putting it directly in the mold. It's like, no, we have to redo every one of them. It's like, why don't we just do it the way they didn't even know that what they were wrapping was not acceptable to the next step. And the people who were unwrapping and rewrapping it thought that was a planned part of the process. Come to find out, it was just a big error that nobody ever caught, right? So that's kind of what we're doing. Sometimes, literally, sometimes you do solve a problem with the SIPOC diagram, right? But it's not a problem-solving tool. It's a communication and a team leveling tool. But sometimes, see, people, oh, you mean it does matter that I do it this way instead of doing it that way? I had no idea. I can start doing it that way. All of a sudden, the problem goes away. You're like, dude, who knew, right? So, but right, that's not the goal. The goal is just to get everybody on the team on the same sheet of music and understand all the main steps. Everybody okay with the idea? All right. This week, you have to turn in your project charter, which is the next subject we'll discuss. The following week, you have to turn in your SIPOC diagram, right? Which means you need to have put it together with your team meeting or with your team, which means between week 1 and week 2, right, you need to get your charter ironed out. And then between week 2 and week 3, you need to have your first team meeting, if not earlier, right? And in the first team meeting, I'm going to suggest you do a SIPOC diagram. And in fact, there is a sample meeting agenda that's provided for you in the files I gave. It's a Word document, and it gives you a sample agenda that you might go through. And there's a section that goes along with that called meeting management. It's a separate section that you can read, you can go through on your own. But it's and you know what's in that agenda? Champion kickoff, review the charter, do a SIPOC diagram in your very first team meeting, right? But then, hey, when they walk out, they're like, what'd you guys do? We did this SIPOC diagram thing, right? And they understand the steps. And now I never understand what they're talking about internal customers. Now I get it. You know what I'm saying? So it's a team leveling tool. All right, with that said, this is gonna be our first exercise where we break into teams, right? And so there are breakout rooms that are in Zoom where you will get assigned to a team, and I'll hit go, and it will send you an invite. Will pop up on your screen. You click it, and it will take you to a breakout team. You and your team will work together on an exercise, and then when time elapses, I'll have the rooms automatically close, and it'll kick you back to the main room where we're at right here. And while you're in those rooms, you're working with your team to accomplish a particular task. We'll be doing a lot of this during the course of the training. So there's lecture, there's exercise, there's individual exercise, there's team exercise. It's a combination of the two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you into your team meetings, right? I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to break you into your team meetings. I'd like you to spend the first 10 minutes building your SIPOC based on what you know right now, right? If you don't know anything about the process, fill out what you do know, right? If you already know the process very detailed, then go ahead and fill out your SIPOC diagram. But guys, whatever we do here is not where you're not going to go show this to the team. This is just for your own edification. You're going to build it from scratch with the team. So make sure you heard that. You're going to build it from scratch because you want the team to go through this exercise. But you need to have a good idea of what it looks like beforehand, right? Or at least what you think it's going to look like. It may, who knows, Najali, it may take a totally different turn when you get into it. It's like, ooh, I didn't even think about that. And that's cool. Right? It's a learning exercise for everybody. I'd like to spend the first 10 minutes doing your SIPOC individually, so you'll do it silently. And then the last 10 minutes, and I'll send you a reminder. I'll say 10 minutes or elapsed, starts discussing. If everybody finishes early, you all agree, then go ahead and start discussing at your leisure. But then I'd like you to share your SIPOC with your team. So that means if you can, do it digitally. So you've got the SIPOC it's called the SIPOC templates. It's in those files that I had you download earlier. Go find that template and you can fill it out. If you need to add steps at the bottom, you can, but don't go more than 8. If you can figure out a way to keep it to 5, keep it to 5, right? Do not try to align your inputs and outputs with the steps in the process. That's not in scope yet. We'll do that later. We might do that later, but we're not doing it yet. So you're just going to put who are the 2 or 3 top suppliers, what are the 2 or 3 top inputs, who are the 2 or 3 top customers, and what are the 2 or 3 top outputs. Everybody understand the idea? Right now, since this is our first exercise in the team breakout, and one more, this is class management stuff. When I get ready to go to exercise, I will always say, is everybody okay with what we're going to do? Does everybody understand what we're going to do? I've been to training where they got them, they tell you, the instructor gives you some marginal explanation, and they break you into groups. And the first thing everybody goes is, what are we supposed to do again? Why are we doing this? You've probably been to those trainings too. I want to make sure that we're not just doing busy work, and I want to make sure you understand what we're doing. Everybody good? Part of the goal is that you can do your own SIPOC, you understand it. Part of the goal is that you do it to a level where you can explain it to others. Because if you can't explain the process to somebody else, that means you don't really understand it. You guys good? And guys, if you don't understand it now, that is fine. What do you need to go do? You need to go to Gemba and you go figure out the process yourself and go see the main steps. Everybody good? So it's a learning exercise for you. Hopefully you're already working in an area with what you're somewhat familiar. So this shouldn't be too foreign to you, but sometimes you are working in a completely unfamiliar area. And hey, son, that's why I was saying earlier, this is much more open-ended than say a PMI project, right? And so you're going to be learning as you go through. Whereas PMI, you already know all the main steps, or you're discovering that and you're building it into your Gantt chart, right? And you're building it into all your contingency planning and everything else. This, it's more of a discovery process. You may already know it, you may not. All right, everybody go with what we're going to do. So I'm going to break into your teams. Spend roughly the first 10 minutes just building your own SciPoc. I'd like you to do it digitally so that when that part's over, the next 10 minutes, you're presenting yours to the team. So you can present it using Zoom. Now, I see a couple of you may have dialed in on an iPhone or what have you, and you don't have access to be able to build this. That's okay. Go to your team and at least support what they're doing and offer commentary in that. But recognize this is going to be an expectation later on, right? So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and set up the breakout rooms. When you go to a breakout room, you're always going to need to identify who is the facilitator and who is the presenter. Now, in this case, everybody is potentially a presenter because you're all building your own individual SciPocs, right? But your facilitator is somebody you're going to say, okay, we all pop in the room and it's me and Andy and Patrice. And we say, okay, anybody want to be it? And Patrice is like, okay, I'll be the leader this time. But she's not the leader every time. Rotate that around. Let somebody else be the spokesperson for the group. Everybody good? All right. So we're trying to just give everybody a chance. And we're going to be doing this for 11 weeks. You'll be with a lot of different groups. You'll probably get to work with everybody in the training at least once, if not multiple times. All right. So we have 4 breakout rooms. Make sure you have a spokesperson. Make sure that everybody is doing their own SciPoc. So the first 10 minutes yours, the last 10 minutes you're going to present to the groups. If you got 4 people in your team, each person gets about 2.5 minutes. So moderate your time. Let your facilitator help think that through. Everybody okay? Everybody good? When we come back, we'll look at 1 or 2 as a total group. We'll go to break and then we'll come back and talk about your project charter. So with that said, rooms are open. Let me see, there it is. Rooms are open. You should have received a pop-up on your screen that said, hey, join your room, and you click it and it'll take you to your room. I'll see you back in 20 minutes.
I have a question, Jim.
Yep.
So I have like 8 projects but I'm not sure if I can use which one's like gonna be good for it.
Yeah. In this case, just pick one you think is likely to be the one that you actually work. Is all I could tell you. It's kind of hard to say what to go do. Just pick one you think is most likely going to be the one you do.
Okay. All right.
And if or if you don't know enough about the one you think is going to be the likely candidate, then just pick one to do that you do have some understanding, just for the sake of practice.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Fair enough. Hi there, iPhone 124. Are you there?
You're mute.
I think you did.
That's another useful thing. Make sure I'm unmuted before I start speaking. I had a whole explanation of why I was covering my camera earlier. After I got through, I was like, oh, I forgot to unmute. Oh, well. Somebody watches it, they'll try to read lips. How'd the exercise go? Any surprises? Any significant challenges? Anybody have one they want to share? I mean, you already know everybody intimately, so you might as well share your SIPOC and we can go from there. What's the worst that can happen?
Okay, I'll share mine.
Yes, a volunteer. I mean, a guinea pig. I mean, a volunteer.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's done correctly. I'm not going to include it.
It's hard to do incorrectly unless you violate some of the things we said, actually.
Okay. So here's my SIPOC.
Brilliant. Good.
Ours with the raw material, and I
Do
included
me a favor, Hassan. If you would minimize your formula bar where it says material mill up top. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you.
So let's start off with the raw material for the part that we're going to make. I also included software that we use.
Sure.
I don't know if that would be software. The PTC will be Creo. SurfCam is to make the CNC programs, and metallurgical test. So these are suppliers that we use for testing metals.
Oh, okay, perfect.
And requirements. And then a heat treater for any requirements the customer has on heat treatment process. Our process is normally from raw material. We design it, forge it, machine it, inspect it, document it, and then we send it to the customer.
So you're doing your own. Do you make your own molds for the forging process?
Yes.
Wow.
We do everything from raw material to send it to the customer.
Yeah.
Some of the heat treatment we do in-house, but if it's very specialized, then we send it out.
Okay, good. So as you explain this to your team, I suppose.
Just everything that we're going through, yeah.
Yeah, and so they got at least a glimpse of what you're going through, and then you may have had to go through an explanation of. I would imagine everybody on your team knows what forging is, but maybe everybody on your team back at your plant or your facility, but everybody that was on your breakout room may not know what forging is or know the difference between forging and casting, and so forth. So good, excellent work actually, and this is exactly what we want for the SIPOC diagram. Scroll down just a little bit, if you would, guys. This is another one of those examples that's, you hate to say this. If everybody's in the same facility, then the people who are designing the part and designing the molds or the dies or whatever you wish to call them, they probably have a pretty good idea what the manufacturing process is. But sometimes you have these elements separated. The design is in a completely different facility in a different state from the forging and the machining, which may be a different state from where the final testing is done. So sometimes you actually do see processes broken out, and it's quite possible. And actually, that's how I got into design in the first place. We had a design process in Detroit. Manufacturing plants were in Tennessee and Florida and a couple other places. You had people who worked in design who had never even been to the facility, right? Much less they'd never worked in manufacturing. So they're designing parts that we have to manufacture. If you're all in the same house, you probably don't have that issue. And did you get to explain what a PPAP is to your team?
No, I didn't explain it.
Good. We'll talk about some of those elements later. That's a textbook example of a SIPOC diagram, right? And the goal is you would build this with your team and get them again to understand who's your PPAP package going to. Is it to the individual people that are having you make these parts, or is it going to an automotive supplier or somebody else?
The customer, the final customer. Sometimes we'll get them through where we'll be a sub supplier, but it'll just go to the final customer.
Okay, so all of those are going to the same customer, I assume. Okay, perfect. Good. Thank you very much for sharing. Any questions or thoughts about a SIPOC before we take a quick break and pick up with the charter? Everybody good? Right. So if you'll stop sharing for us, Hassan, thank you. Am I saying your name correctly, Hassan?
Hassan.
Okay, good. All right, guys, I got an assignment for you. So I'm going to give you a 7-minute break. During the break, I would like you to look up something called confirmation bias. What is confirmation bias? You can look it up real quick. You can get it on Wikipedia or somewhere else. But I'd like you to go look that up because we're going to talk about it when we get to the project charter. So I'll give you 7 minutes. That gives you time to look that up and get your break. When we come back, we'll pick up with a project charter. So I'll see you back in 7. Last break of the day.
Thank you.
Hey, Jim, I have a question about the project.
Sure.
So the project, to discuss like which project we're going to be picking, is that through the appointments, or is that going to be done also in class?
Well, the assumption at this point is you've already narrowed down to a specific project. So if you go back, do you have the project selection workbook?
Yes, I received that, but I thought it said that we needed to have at least 8.
No. There's an opportunity for you to fill out at least 8. Some people will start off and they already know what their project's going to be and it fits the criteria, they're good to go. But you could work with your champion, identify 3 or 4 or even up to 8 projects, but you need to select one. So the reason I mention that is there is a project selection matrix that's in that book. And it has like a 2-axis and you can make the size of the dot bigger or smaller. And we'd like our project to be in the upper right-hand corner and a really big dot. So it's basically how difficult it's going to be, how many resources are required, what's the payback, and the payback is the size of the dot.
All right. So I had 2 that were kind of in the same, the 3s basically, they're all urgent, difficult, and impact. But I wasn't sure if I could use them because for one of them is about bringing product from the quoting all the way to production and reducing that lead time.
Okay, yeah, we could work on that.
So we
probably need to do
involve
something
like new product development, but not actually developing the part, but the process of developing it.
Yeah, and so how do you? I'm assuming you have to design the dies. Do you call them dies or molds, or what do you call your forging? Guys,
yeah.
So you have to design the dies you're going to use in forging. You have to develop the programs that you're going to run through your CNC equipment. You have to, you probably maybe have to design fixtures to do the measuring if you're going to make several of them.
Develop the process instruction.
Yep.
Anything that we're going to inspect with, basically everything.
So what does your lead time look like now?
It's because it depends right now, because a lot of the customers will push it like for a year. They'll place an order and be like, push it for another year. So our data will say that it's like a lot longer, but normally it'll be like 4 months maybe. But actually designing it doesn't take too long, like 2 months. And then getting the material sometimes can take a long time.
If we do work that, we'll have to parse out the ones that were delayed from your data set and just look at ones that you initiated and went through. And then we'll start mapping that process out. And so you'll be building something like your SIPOC with a little more detail, and you'll understand how much waiting time is in between the steps. Like where is it sitting and waiting? Because that's what you'll have to do is figure out how do you get rid of the sitting and waiting time. And then why do you have waiting? Is it because you're running into bottlenecks? Is it because we batch and queue? And there's a whole, we'll talk about value stream mapping. That would be a good project. You could also look at like quality of parts that you're making, that you're shipping out, especially if you have any redundant or repetitiveness where you're making the same part multiple times. There's several things we could look at.
The other project was in that realm of there was a part that we used to make a long time ago that we didn't have that many problems with, and then we started having problems with, and we don't make it anymore, but we might.
If you're not making anymore, you don't want to do it. But yeah, that lead time could be, it's a viable candidate.
No, but we got an order from a customer for that part. They want us to start making it again, but they changed the drawing, so it's not exactly the same part. So I don't know if it even applies, because that will yes, I have to reduce the scrap, but it's also got new requirement,
Yeah, until we assess our baseline capability, it'd be difficult to identify what your potential is. And you can't do that until you start making the parts.
Okay, or then I'll do the new product development.
Yeah, it makes sense unless there's another one of those 8. And you can review that and actually prioritize it with that matrix that we talked about.
Okay.
All right, good. Patrice, did you have a question? And you're muted.
There we go.
Oh,
so my question is, my project has been identified. There's about 3 that our director wants to work on. The main one that's given us a problem is data marking and classification of data. It's a little interesting because we're relying on information from the government to feed us what the data market is. And I'll give you an example. There used to be a data market called...
Be mindful of the time. We only got a minute left.
Yeah, they've switched to data marking. And what I've discovered this week was, even if our private company holds a project, if the government doesn't identify it as secret or whatever the classification is, we can't identify it as that until they give us the hands off. I'm kind of stuck from there because I'm just like, wait, you want me to bring this up? It's a global problem, but in our company, I don't know how to fit that in this type of project where.
Yeah, and unfortunately, with such a brief description, I'm not sure I understand, but I would ask you a couple of questions. What is the unit that's going through the process? Is it a data release that has been, and a defective is one that has been released and yet we misclassified it? Is that what the problem is? You're misclassifying data? Is it that it takes too long to get it classified? What is
misclassifying? Yep.
And is this something that you have control over, or is this a request you send to the government, you wait for them to decide to tell you if it's classified or not?
It's both. So the government sends our project for the classification.
Do me a favor and sign up for coaching. Did you sign up for coaching next week?
No, I will though.
Yeah, please do. And we'll pick it up from there, and then we'll have ample time to discuss it at that point. Because I'm not going to have much time after class today. I've got other things I have to manage. But next Tuesday would be ideal, and we can figure that out.
All right.
Maybe bring some examples or what, to show me, and we can go from there. All right, welcome back, everyone. I was just answering a couple of questions about projects, but without any further ado, I want to get into your project charter. So let me open that up.
All right.
All right. As we get into the project charter, arguably, you could argue, the most important outcome of the define phase is a good project charter with a solid problem statement. And so as I go through this, I'm going to talk through several elements of it. We're going to do a quick we won't do a complete exercise where you build your own project charter, but we will do, sub parts of that as we go through. Okay. There's a very interesting quote in the bottom right-hand corner here, and it says, "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." That is to say, if you can't state what the problem is, you're not going to be able to solve it. You need to be able to state it in measurable terms. And so, Patrice, that's why I was asking you, what is the unit and what is a defective? What is one that is unsatisfactory? And that's why, are we focusing on cycle time, or are we focusing on, in this case, it would be misclassification if I understood it correctly. And we need to ferret that out more. But that's the idea here. How are we going to figure that out? Okay, let's back up a second. A project charter. Charter is known as a document that gives rights or privileges to an individual or to a group of people. You could think about William Penn was given a charter to found the state of Pennsylvania, right? And he was given a certain amount of land that he could go exercise his governorship over to develop and become a tax-paying province of England, right? In 1215, the Magna Carta was signed between King John and the barons of England to establish how this monarchy is going to relate to the people who actually own the land, the nobles, right? And it was called the Magna Carta, with a great charter. Later on, governments, they will give charters to schools. They have charter schools where they give them a certain amount of money, and your expectation is you're to train children or teach children and so forth. So we've got this idea of charter. For us, in our project, the charter are the marching orders for the team. It's, if you will, it's an expression of empowerment. It's saying, okay, team, we're going to give you this problem. You have 5 months. We want you to solve the problem and get it running right, and then give it back to us, and management will manage it from now on. So management is, if you will, they're empowering the team to go solve this problem. It's an agreement between management and the team. And obviously it requires acknowledgement from management and from the team about what the problem is, how much time they have, how much effort it's going to take to resolve, and so forth. So it has several components to it. A roster of players, specifically the champion, the belt, you, and the team members, which we've already discussed. So I'm not going to, reevaluate that. But most importantly, we're going to get this idea of what is the problem statement and what is the project objective or goal, if you will. All right. Then we'll talk about assumptions, constraints, scoping, and preliminary plan. There is a project charter template that you've been provided with in the material that I handed out, cleverly called project charter. Right? But you don't have to use, if your organization already has a project charter that you want to use, groovy, I don't care, right? Use whatever one. But I am going to compel you to use the problem statement template that I'm going to show you in a moment. So you can use your own charter template, I don't care. But the problem statement itself has to conform with what I'm going to show you in a moment. All right. So we've already talked about organization roles, talked about team members, stakeholders, subject matter experts and stuff. I'm not going to rehash that. I want to get to the problem statement. The problem statement is a very specific statement about the intention of the project. Now, it may be a restatement of a business case you've already developed, but more than likely, it's going to be much more specific. All right. What should a problem statement be? It should be very short, right? Albert Einstein once said, anybody can make it complex. It takes genius to make it simple, right? That's what we're trying to do. Take this really big, complex, difficult problem and summarize it in one sentence, right? We have a tendency when we start stating problems to list all sorts of background information and all these other issues that are touched by it and all the other problems we're dealing with. I'm with you. Problems are complex, but we have to focus down to a simple one-sentence statement of our problem. Here's the thing. If you can't state what the problem is in one sentence, you don't understand the problem enough to solve it. All right. This is a best practice. I'm as far as past my opinion, I'm almost going to say this is the way to do it, because when I see people be unsuccessful, it's because they try to focus on too many things at once and they can't solve the problem. The human eye has a lot of periphery vision, right? So you can look out your eye and you can see stuff to the right, stuff. You can't see great detail. You can't necessarily see how many fingers people are holding up, but you can see that there is a hand there. You can see somebody walking by. But the human eye has something called the fovea. It's a very concentrated density of receptors in the near the middle of the eye that the lens focuses the light onto that point. When you look somebody in the eye, they are directly centered in your fovea. When you direct your attention to something, your fovea is pointed to that thing, whether you turn your head or whether you just turn your eyes, right? The whole takeaway from that is we can only focus on one thing at one time. We can focus on 3 different things, but that means we have to stop and shift our focus and stop and shift our focus, which means that we've lost focus of the first thing. But the takeaway is you can only focus on one thing at a time. The same it is with project work. You can't focus on too many things, or consequently, you focus on nothing. So we're going to narrow this down to a singular problem. All right, so what should a problem statement do? It should specifically describe how the problem is measured. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So what is the measurement system that you're going to use? What is the metric? Secondly, it has a baseline. It has some history where, Patrice, we can go back in time over the last year and say, these are how many data releases we had, and this is the percentage of them that were misclassified or not classified or whatever. Or you could say, this is how many releases we had, and it took us on average 42.7 days to get them properly classified, whether it's cycle time or whether it's correct assessment. You could do either one, but you've got a baseline of history from which you can draw your average. Everybody good with that idea? So you've got, whether it's fiscal year 2023 or was January 1 to August the 1st of 2024, or whatever your time period is, you've got a baseline. Third, we're going to describe what the impact of the problem is. What does it mean to why do we care? Okay, we got this problem, so what? What does it matter to us? Usually we're going to express what the impact is in terms of money. Right now, what's the purpose of business? What's the goal of business? To make money. That's the goal of all businesses. What's the goal of a nonprofit? To keep getting enough money to maintain non-profitable status, right? And so, unfortunately, that causes some nonprofits to turn into marketing organizations. They spend a very small percentage of the money they take in on their actual charitable cause. Obviously, it's gotten dysfunctional, right? So the idea is they should spend 90% or more of what they take in on the actual charity they're trying to do. But sometimes it gets so topsy-turvy, they spend all their money on marketing, because the goal of a nonprofit is to keep being a nonprofit. They make enough money to be a nonprofit. We also want to use real data. The problem statement should not state the root cause, right? I asked you to look up what? What were you asked to look up during the break? Confirmation bias. What is, somebody read it to me or give me your in your own words, what is confirmation bias? Anybody?
Searching for information that aligns with your views or thoughts.
Okay, so what was the first part? I missed the very first part.
Searching for information.
Okay, searching for information that aligns with your own views or own thoughts. If you've already determined what the root cause is, what data are you going to go searching for, according to Carlos's definition? Data that already supports what you've concluded. You guys good? What are you going to do with data that contradicts what you are looking for? You will discard it, right? You may have heard of the term cognitive dissonance. You ever heard that term, cognitive dissonance? It's when you've got your mind made up about a subject and somebody presents you with data that so dramatically contradicts what you believe, you can't process it because you know that must be true, but it doesn't fit what you believe, and the brain shuts down, right? That's cognitive dissonance. You're like, and it turns into name calling. I'll just start calling somebody names. That's the lowest form of debate is ad hominem attacks. That means you've lost the debate, right? But it happens in politics. It happens in high school debate. It happens in business. It happens all the time, right? But if we state the root cause, there's a saying, and this is really, it's a very thought-provoking statement. It's what we think we know that keeps us from learning, right? Because if we already know something, we don't go investigate it further. That's the problem with knowing the root cause. You already know the root cause. And here's the corollary to that. I mean, Nigeli, if you already know the root cause, you don't need this stuff. Go fix it, right? It's what we don't want to do is use this as a mechanism to build a support case for what we've already determined to be true. That's not the goal. The goal is to go in an open-ended search for truth. All right. The second thing is it should not contain a solution for the same reason as confirmation bias. That's why you look that up. It's an interesting human behavior, right? By the way, who do we tend to hang out with? People who think like we do, right? Who people have the same values, the same goals, the same thoughts. That's just natural. Unfortunately, that drives people into subcategories and subgroups, and it can be counterproductive. But the second part of this is it shouldn't contain a solution. What we're not going to do is use Six Sigma as a vehicle to rationalize the fact that we're going to go buy a new software for design, Hassan, right? Because somebody's already decided we're going to spend $180,000 on that. I need you to build a business case to rationalize it. That's not a Lean Sigma project. We've already made up our mind. That's almost the same thing as having the root cause. You with me? It's supposed to be an open-ended. The third thing it shouldn't do is blame people. It's not to say that people aren't to blame. They very well, and maybe people just aren't doing what they're supposed to do. But more often than not, far more often than not, it's a bad process. People are dealing with a bad process, and we're lucky. You ever worked in a place and you think, I don't know how they're getting anything good out. I don't know. I don't understand how they stay in business. This thing is so broken. I've seen that numerous times. And this is counterintuitive. I've been in businesses that are so broken, they're making money hand over fist. And I've seen processes that are really run well, but they're in such a competitive environment, they can barely maintain their margins. I mean, you see really big extremes, okay? But we don't want to focus on people. We're focused on process. If it's a people issue, that becomes a management issue. That's not a Lean Sigma issue, right? It's management's responsibility to make sure people are doing their job. It's not a Lean Sigma thing. Lean Sigma's thing is to make sure they got good processes that if they follow, they'll get good results. You understand the distinction? So we don't focus on people. We don't state the solution. We don't state the root cause. All right, let's look through these together instead of doing them as a separate example. Let's just do it. And now what I would like you to do is I'm going to read this out loud to you, but I can't do it simultaneously. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will screenshot this, and I'm going to drop it in the chat so you have access to it. Sorry, it was focused on somebody who had, there we go. All right, so in the chat, you've got a picture of the criteria. Everybody see it? So open that up on your own desktop. And as I'm reading this problem statement, I'd like you to tell me what's good about this problem statement and what's bad about this problem statement. All right, I'll read it out loud. The printer plate making department is having excessive amounts of makeover, which results in budget overruns and overtime. These makeovers can also result in scrapping full production runs of material, right? What's wrong with that problem statement?
Two sentences, and it blames printer making department right off the bat.
Yep, we are. So we're blaming a department. Now, there's nothing wrong with narrowing to a department if we have data to support the problem is occurring here. There's nothing wrong with that. But here, you know what I don't see, Andy? I don't see any data. I don't see any history. I don't see any time frame. I don't see any money. I just see a rambling problem statement. I see actually a business case. This is a good starting point, but that is not a problem statement. I don't even know what they're going to work on. Makeovers, overtime, overruns, scrap. I mean, who knows? You with me on the idea? That's not a good problem statement. All right, let's look at the second one. The printer plate making department over the last 3 months has experienced 7.24% makeover rate because of poor handling by the transport operators. What is that? How about that? What's good about that one? It does have a couple of good elements. What are they? Does it have a time frame?
It doesn't. It does have a time frame, and it includes like a specific rate. Mm-hmm.
And it's got a measure, the makeover rate. It's a percentage. We've got the value, 7.24. What's wrong with it?
Including the solution?
Yeah, they're already pointing the fingers at the people, right? There's those transport operators. I'm going to explain this one to you in a minute. What else is wrong with it? There's no money. What's it worth to us? Is this worth $200,000 a year or 38 cents a year? Right? Sometimes you have these really problems that happen all the time and you realize it doesn't cost us anything. So why are we worried about it? It's not that we shouldn't fix it, but probably got bigger fish to fry. Right? What else is wrong with it? What does good look like? Is good 15% or is good 0%? It's inconclusive. I'm assuming a lower makeover rate is better, but I don't know what makeover rate means. It could mean the opposite of what I think. You with me in the idea, right? As an aside, never put the last 3 months. Put June 1 to August 31st of 2024, because we don't know if those last 3 months were in 2021 or if it was just the immediate 3 months adjacent to September 20th. You with me in the idea? Actually put the dates. Don't put the last year or whatever. Just put during the last 3 months. What 3 months? Right? Actually use real dates. This was a manufacturing plant that was making printer plates. And they may have seen a newspaper. It's aluminum plate, and they will put a negative image or a positive image of what's going to be printed on the newspaper on this big flat aluminum plate. They wrap that plate around a cylinder, and as the cylinder rotates, it picks up ink and transfers it to another rubber mat that transfers it to paper, and you can high-speed print newspapers. Right? They were doing these plates. Now, if you're printing a book, they will have if it's a 160-page book and each plate can make 16 pages, right, front and back, then it's going to take you 4 plates per side if it's a color book. So you got to do the 3 primary colors in black to be able to print. And using those 4 colors, you can make any color you want. But you got 4 plates for the top and 4 plates for the bottom, and you're going to have at least 5, if not 10 sets of those, right? When they made these plates, they basically take the plate, put a piece of film on it, expose it to bright light, remove the film, run it through an acid bath, and it etches the plate, which that's what gives it some depth, right? And it eats away what has not been exposed to the light. And then they bend it and prep it, and they put it on a shelf. The transport operators had to go get those and move them to the floor. But because they didn't make them in order, the transport operators were tasked with take out all the plates and put them in sequence in which they're going to be loaded on the press. Because you've made now, 8 times 10, 80 plates, and they're all made out of sequence. So you got to get them in sequence so that when you put them on the plate, they can just grab them and load them on the machine to minimize setup time. That was the first issue. Secondly, somebody had built a rack out of 2x4s and plywood, and that's where they were storing the plates. Third, they were transporting the plates with these little rubber carts like you'd see in a cafeteria, like a Rubbermaid cart, right? It wasn't designed to transport these plates, and the edges would hang off the side. And then fourth, in order to put them in order, Rena, they would literally take them off the shelf, stack them up in the floor, grab them and put them in the right sequence, put them on the cart and take them out. And you go look at that process, you're like, Andy, I can't believe they don't damage every one of them. They're actually doing a good job of getting such a low damage rate, really. And you're thinking then, became the question, who thought this process out? And hey, son, you know who thought it out? Nobody thought it out. It just kind of happened over time. And as they grew, it got bigger. And before you know it, got this big mess. So here's the interesting thing, Andy, the transport operators arguably were causing the damage. But when you go look at the process, you realize they're actually heroes, that they're not destroying everything. It's pretty good they can do that good, right? All right, here's the last one. During the time period of March 1 to May 31st, they're missing the year. They need the year, right? The printer plate making department was experienced 7.24% makeover rate, which is well above the target of 0%, resulting in an annualized cost of poor quality of $370,000, right? It's got a time frame, it's got a metric, they got a baseline, they got a goal, they got a value. You with me? Everybody good? And it's all summarized into a single sentence. Now, there is a variety of, these are problem statements taken from preceding classes. And they're not exactly following the template, but they all follow a template. During 2021 fiscal year, the Special Projects Department overhead labor hours was at 120 hours per project, but it's targeted to be at 8 hours per project. The gap's worth to be worth $51,000 a year. Or during calendar year 21, the pilot plant scrap cost was at 2.5 million, but it's targeted to be at 1.3 million. The gap is estimated to be worth 1.2 million, right? During 2021, the fulfillment time was at 22 minutes per order, but it's targeted to be at 15 minutes per order. This gap's worth 112,000. So you'll notice in every one of these, they followed this template during some period of time. Calendar year 21, January 1 to August 31st of 2024, whatever your time period is, the blank. And Patrice, we talked about too, cycle time or misclassification percentage, right? Or something else along those lines. And so if I'm playing along with Patrice's project and I'm probably misstating it. Hey, son, I'll do yours in a moment just because you asked, right? During January 1 to August 31st of 2024, the misclassification rate for data sets was at 18% and is targeted to be at 0%. The gap is worth $17 billion a year or some value. Maybe not that high, but who knows, Patrice, maybe it is 17 billion, right?
Yeah.
Hey, son, let's say you're going to work on that cycle time, right? So you would definitely screen down to just ones that were not delayed or pushed out, right? But you say from January 1 of 2023 to August 31st of 2024, the average time to complete from order to ship was at 197 days, but it's targeted to be at 40 days. And I have no idea what the numbers would be. It'd be based on your baseline, right? And then the gap is worth, and I'm not sure how you would value that, right? But maybe you get premiums if you can ship it faster. Maybe you can reduce expedited shipping. I don't know, right? But you could also look at it from the terms of from January 1 to August 31st of 2024, the average material consumption rate was at, well, let me say it a different way. The average material utilization rate was at 72%, but it's targeted to be at 90%, which means the way we set it up, design it, forge it, machine it, we're cutting off way too much material. And if we set up the forge dies in a little bit better, maybe we can use less material to make the blank that we're cutting. I don't know, right? But that's and then you would determine out the gap of what that excessive percentage was. Guys, you can apply this to anything, right? And that's what you see here is a variety of examples, right? And these are all in the training material that you would have downloaded. Is everybody okay with the idea so far? Right. So some of you can do this right now. Some of you realize, dude, I don't have half that data, and that's fine. But what I would like you to do, at least preliminarily, now this is what I was saying. I don't care which charter template you use, but you have to use this template for your problem statement, right? Be careful, because you know what people want to do? They want to add a bunch of information. They want to add this, and they want to add context, and they want to, look, all that's good. Just don't put it in the problem statement. There's another place we can put it in the charter, and I encourage you to do it, but don't put it here. The more information you put in it, the more you pollute it, the less clear it becomes what you're trying to do. You want to be able to state it as concisely and precisely as you can, right? Now, Andy, there's an intentional discrepancy here. I have separated out, this gap is estimated to be worth blank per year. Sometimes organizations will not share financials with employees. That happens occasionally with privately held organizations. Publicly traded, it's probably not the issue. But in some privately held, they will not give you money. You just have to get your management to agree that this project is worth enough money, hopefully over $100,000, but they may not be willing to publicize it, or they may not be willing to tell you. That's why this is a separate sentence, because this is, now we have a requirement your project's worth 100 grand. I have to trust you to help me verify that, right? But you may be in a situation where I can't share that publicly. Well, then don't include that sentence. Everybody good? Right. But the idea is you could just make that a comma and make that a single sentence and without being a run-on sentence, right? Or put, use a conjunction and the gap is worth, right? What I want you to do is I want you to take about 3 minutes and I want you to put as much information as you know about your project right now, right? What is your baseline period of time? You're just going to look over the last 6 months. You're looking over the last 3 years. What is your unit of measure? Is it a defective percentage? Is it a yield? Is it an on-time rate? Is it a whatever the measure is? Is it an injury rate? What is the measure that you're looking at, right? What is your unit of measure? What's the measurement system? What is your current average? Now, hey, son, that's what you probably can't get the current average, right? But if you're going to do the cycle time, you know what the cycle time, you know how to verbalize the first 2 steps. You'd go get your baseline, and then you have to say, what is our ultimate goal? Not the goal for this project. What's the ultimate goal? Patrice, your ultimate goal is 0 misclassifications. You may not be able to do that in one project, but that's your goal right now, 0 misclassifications. Everybody okay with the idea? Right? So hopefully you've got a business case and you can use that business case and the knowledge you already have to at least build part or all of this statement. And by the way, what you don't have right now, this is what you got to get next week, ASAP. And maybe even today, if you have time this afternoon to start looking into it. The longer it takes you to figure this out, the longer your project's going to take, because you can't even start focusing on it until you know exactly what you're trying to improve. Right? So we need to think that through. And sometimes, guys, these are already existing metrics where we can just go pull the data out of SAP or Oracle or whatever our system is. Sometimes this may be something we've never measured, not in an official way. And I'm going to have to put that measurement and go back and evaluate some historic data to come up with it. And people are all over the board with where they are with their project. Right? Take about 3 minutes and let's put it in. And what I'd like to do is talk about 2 examples randomly from people. All right, and let's see what your problem statement look like. And what I'm going to do is request it not be Patrice or Hassan. I'd like to get input from somebody else. But do about 3 minutes and let's come back and chat about it. Okay, we're right at 3 minutes. Anybody have a problem statement they'd like to share with the group that we could discuss?
Yeah, I can go.
Yeah, that'd be great. Go ahead, Gotham.
Yeah, so during January 2023 to December 2023, the verification testing time was at an average of 6 weeks, but is targeted to be at 4 weeks. This gap is estimated to be worth $68,000 per year.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's see if we can find a way to push that value up a bit, right? But instead, and only critique I'd offer is instead of quoting it in weeks, let's quote it in days, right? It's a little more, you get a little more resolution. So it's at 42 days, and the goal is to be at, whatever, well, that'd be six times 6, 42, 7 times 4 is 28. So it's at 42, it's supposed to be at 28 days or something like that. All right, so excellent. That's good. And you may want to extend your time frame to more recent data as well. Maybe all the way to July 31st if you have it, but only if you have that. Everybody good? All right, now guys, remember, the problem statement is a statement of what the problem is right now and how bad it is right now and what the ultimate goal is. There is a companion statement that goes with this called the project objective. This is what you intend to do with this project, right? So imagine you've got, for example, right now it's taking you 7 weeks or 42 days. Your actual goal is to get to 7 days, right? So you may say, we're at 42 days, we'd like to be at 7 days. Our goal for this project is to go from 42 down to 28. And we may look at another project to go from 28 to 15 and another project to go from 15 to 7. So there may be a series of continuous projects or more than one project. Or you may say, I'm trying to go from 48 to my ultimate goal of, from 42 to 28 in one project. It just depends, right? So Patrice, if you've got, I'm making up numbers. You got a 7% misclassification. Your goal is to be at 0. Maybe in your first project, you try to go from 7 to 2 and maybe work another project to go from 2 to 0. Right? That's what the objective is. It's how the team knows what victory looks like. It's what the finish line is. How much do they need to improve it? Do they have to close the whole gap or close a subset of that gap? The same sort of thing. It should specifically describe what the goal of the project is. And it should be aggressive. We'd like to see a breakthrough improvement of 90% if we can get it, right? It should clearly identify how much of the gap is going to be closed, describe the benefit of that, and state the completion date, which is the end of the training. Now, by the way, for everybody, this is all on Canvas as well, but let me, I'll tell you the exact date. Your final project is due, I think it's, I won't even say, let me just make sure. I'm double checking the calendar now.
February 7th.
Say it again.
February 7th.
I think you're right. Yeah, so actually February 6th, we'll be doing the February 5th. We'll be doing the presentations on February 5th, right? Your project will be due on January the 31st. So you need to be in the improve phase. And better yet, you're completely finished with handing it off. But if not, at least you've got to the improve phase and everybody's agreed that you've made the improvement. So January 31st is our targeted completion date. Okay, so let's go back then to the template. Again, shouldn't state the solution, shouldn't focus on individuals. So let's look at these problem statements and tell me what's good about them or bad about them. The goal of the project is to never have rework ever again in the printer plant making department by December 31st this year. There's lots of things wrong with that one. What's wrong with it? What year? Is this 2 years old, this project, or is this 2024? It's unclear, right? Secondly, never, ever, never. They say never, but you just said never to do something, and now you're saying never say never, but it's like a contradictory thing. Never, ever, never, ever? Not good. The second one, the goal is to reduce the printer plate making department. Guys, you don't even know what the printer plate making department is. You don't need to. That's the whole point. You just need to be able to evaluate the problem statement. The printer plate making department makeover rate from 7.24 to 7% by retraining all the operators, saving $4,000 a year. What's wrong with this one?
That's the solution.
They've already know the solution. They're going to retrain. There's 3 common solutions: train, retrain, and automate. Be careful with that. Right. So they already know the solution. That's wrong. What else is wrong with it?
It's focusing on people because it's blaming
Yeah,
it
and
on the operator.
we're back to beating up on people. We're going to train them because it's hey, look, if the process is that dependent on people doing things a certain way, maybe we need to figure out a way to make it more robust, right? But continuing, what else is wrong with it? Is it very aggressive?
The time frame?
Yeah, and there's no time frame. We don't know
No
when
time.
to do, right? All right, let's look at the last one. By December this year, the goal is to reduce the makeover rate in the printer plate making department from 7.24 to 1%. Right? What's missing on that one? How much money are they going to save? It's unclear, right? When's the due date? December of this year. Is this already a year late or is that 2024 it's due? It's unclear. You with me? So you need to spell it out. Same sort of thing. We have a template that we can fill out. This is the same unit of measure that was in the problem statement. That's the same baseline period of time that was in the problem statement. That's the same, and this is the that's the baseline average that was in that time. This is the goal. This is the goal for your project. It may be the same thing as your problem statement, but more than likely it's going to be a subset of that. So Patrice, I'll keep using your example. You're trying to go, I'm making up numbers too. 7.24% down to 0% is the ultimate goal. But in this project, you're going to try to go from 7.24 to 2%. So that would be the improvement goal. You understand the distinction? One is the ultimate goal. This is what you're going to try to do in this project, right? By whatever the date was, January of 2024, 2025, by what that completion date was. What did I say it was? I've already forgotten. January 31st. What was the date?
January 31st.
Okay, yeah, January 31st, which is that Friday or Thursday or Friday. Generating an annual savings of whatever the project is worth. So again, I want if you use my template, all is well. If you use a different template, fine, but make sure your objective uses this fill in the blank and don't add anything else to it. People have a tendency to want to add 3 or 4 sentences. It just muddies it up. If you want to add that information, you can do it in constraints assumptions. Everybody good? So the expectation for next week's turn-in is you've completed your project turn and you've gotten it signed off, right? Now, there's a couple of other options. Assumptions and constraints. Assumptions are things you believe are going to be true during the duration of the project. Constraints are things you believe are going to limit your ability to be successful. In summary, this is a place for you to put what you're concerned about in the project, right? If you say, you know, we've tried this problem we've tried solving this problem 4 times already. Nobody's been successful. People have already made up their mind we can't solve it. So that's going to be a barrier you have to get across, right? And you may have other assumptions or other constraints. This is just a place for you to get those out on the table so that management's aware of them. Everybody good? So if you're about to engage in a project that you're really concerned has a lot of caveats to it, this is where you put those caveats. If you want to add additional information to elaborate on the problem statement, put it here, right? And that's cool, but don't put it in the problem statement. The problem statement should just be that fill in the blank template. In fact, some people, Andy, just literally fill in the blank. You can see where they typed over what the blank was. That's perfect, right? Don't muddy it up. People have a tendency to want to, and it just makes it worse, right? Scoping is twofold. Number one, where are we going to start and stop looking at the problem? That's actually your start and stop in your SciPoc diagram, right? It's the same, that's the same limitation. What you're saying is, I'm not going to put the problem before this step, and I'm not going to look at it after that step. I'm just going to look at it within those boundaries, right? That's the first part, the start and end point. The second part is, what can we do something about, and what are the parts of the project we can't do anything about? Let's not spend a bunch of time arguing about stuff we can't influence. That's why both Patrice and Hassan, you got to be careful with your projects when it's parts of the process you have no control over. Now, if you can control it by providing better information to start with, providing better requirements up front, maybe so. But if it's something that you're waiting for a supplier to give you and you have no influence over the supplier and the supplier happens to be the customer, we got to be careful with that, right? So just be cognizant. You don't want to spend a lot of time arguing about stuff you can't do anything about, right? Now, you do find some people on your team want to go back and keep talking about the ultimate root cause. You know, if we hadn't put too much nitrogen on that barley, we wouldn't have had such skunky taste in beer. Yeah, maybe that's the cause. It's probably because you left it in the trunk for 2 weeks. That probably has more influence over it than anything. But some people want to go back to ultimate root cause. An in-frame, out-of-frame tool can be a useful tool. If you find your team keeps wanting to talk about things and just turn everything into a gripe session about stuff you can't do anything about, the in-frame, out-of-frame is a great way to kind of clarify that and say, look, team, with Post-it notes, these are the 8 things we can actually address. These are 3 things we can't do anything about, so let's not talk about them anymore. I mean, we get a beer, we want to go gripe about it. That's one thing. But let's not waste our team time talking about stuff we can't influence, right? And then you got borderline. Just as a side note, if you've ever read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, he draws a picture of 2 concentric circles. The circle of concern, all the things that worry you, global warming, war in the Middle East, blah, 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 all the things that worry you. But you have a very narrow circle of influence. And he talks about effective people worry about stuff they have influence, their own family, their own immediate work environment, their particular job, the way they behave, the way they respond. But there's bigger world stuff you and I can't do much about it, right? We can vote, we can protest, but other than that, unless we take up arms, there's not much, we can't. So don't waste your time worrying. Same thing with a team. Don't waste your time worrying about peripheral issues you can't address. Let's focus on what we can. Right. And usually this isn't necessary. Sometimes it's needed to get a team to focus. Right. And then you got start point, end point. We talked about that in the SIPOC. I won't deal it. Be aware your scoping at this point is preliminary. It's not written in stone. We talked about that with the charter too. It's only what you know right now. It is subject to change. And if you need to change it, that's no problem. Just make sure everybody knows you're changing it. And you may need to get it re-signed off. Get your champion to re-sign it off and say, okay, that's cool. We're going to shift the focus. You may find that your initial scope where you thought the problem lived actually lives in a completely different department. And you may have to actually, Rena, you may wind up disassembling this project and say, I got to work in a completely different area because this is all design issue. This isn't us. And you got to get a different champion. Right. So that does happen periodically. Usually it's not that dramatic, but sometimes. Preliminary plan is basically you need to be in the improve phase, right? And hopefully you're in the control phase, but you at least need to be in the thick of the improve phase by the time it's time to turn your presentation in, right? Almost always there's a few outstanding issues you've got to address, and that's fine. But we need to think through how are you going to get through. Here's another one. By week 3, you ought to be finished with the define phase. You ought to be in the measure phase, right? So the quicker you get out of the define phase, the quicker your project's going to go. The longer you drag this out, actually the worse the project gets because you kind of lose momentum. So try to get through the define phase in the next 2 weeks. If you can get through it by next class, that's even more better. All right. Last bit, you got sign-offs. Champion is signing off, basically saying, this is the problem. This is how bad it is. And I agree, if you improve it by this much, you'll be successful. So that's what the champion is signing off to. And they're giving you permission to go work it, and they're telling you they're going to support it. If you're claiming dollar savings, it's a good idea to go run that by finance before you start the project in earnest, just to make sure they agree with your preliminary assessment of value, right? What you don't want to do, Najali, is work through the project and to get to the end thinking you saved $140,000 and finance tell you actually cost us $20,000. We don't want to do that, right? It's like buying a $150 fax machine to save money on stamps that you mail twice a year. It's like, that doesn't make sense. So be careful with that. We're not going to do the exercise because we've kind of done the preliminary part, but I do want to talk briefly about the metric. There's a tool called a primary metric, and it's called the primary metric because it's the thing that you're going to track, right? So in Hassan's, it might be the cycle time, as we talked about. In Patrice's, it might be either the cycle time or it may be the misclassification rate. I'm making that term up, Patrice. I don't know what your measurement's going to be, but you follow me on the concept, right? What the metric does, it gives us ability to track our progress over time, right? And it has 5 elements. I'm going to switch over. The baseline performance is, Patrice, you'd like to be able to go back and look maybe 2 months or 3 months in the past. You may have the total data, but you're going to look at 3 or 4 months and show that's what this black line is. That's the actual defect rate, cycle time, whatever the measurement is that you're dealing with. That's what it actually was over the last, say, 3 months. The red line is the average of that time, all right? This is your project objective. All this is that red line and that green line are straight out of your problem statement. Just make sure your historic data agrees. Right? Then you've got this completely arbitrary trend line, just connecting the two. And you're going to show how your process was changed over time. All right. And so the second is a secondary metric that you may be looking at. And I'll leave that up to your discretion. You may have something else you need to be concerned about. But let me share this with you real quick. In your templates that were handed out, there are 3 primary metric templates that you can choose from: weekly, monthly, or per event. Now, Hassan and Patrice may choose the per event metric instead of the monthly. Now, If you're working a project and you generate 20 or 30 a week, you'll just average those and that'll be your weekly measure. But Patrice, you may have 2 weeks in a row where you don't get any data requests in, and the next week you get 3 data requests, and the next one you don't have any. So you might do a monthly, or you might do, if you have that few, you might do a per data request, right? So every time we make a data request and receipt, so we would do, that's called a per event. So let me share with you here. And I'm just showing the data files that you're looking at, or that you downloaded, I should have said. And you'll notice down here it says primary metric chart, monthly, per event, and weekly. You're going to pick the one that makes sense for your project. Can you guys see that? So those 3 per, and I'm just going to look just at the weekly one. All right. Let me switch over to that once it decides to open. Sorry for the pause, waiting, patiently waiting. And let me share. All right. You will see that this primary metric has 2 tabs in it. The data entry sheet for the weekly data and the actual weekly primary metric. You guys see that, all right? The data entry sheet, you put the name of your project here. You put your training start date, which is today. You put your project end date, and you may have to override that. And then you've got your project baseline, and then you've got your goal. Then this is going to show the data based on whatever you enter here. It's going to change these dates, and it's going to show your weekly measure. Or Patrice, if you did the per event, it just shows, instead of it being a weekly data, it's every data request. You may have a number for the data request, or a project for the data, project number for the data request. You'd have the project numbers here, and you'd have whether it was good or bad, right? Or what percentage of it was good or bad. It depends on how we decide to do it. We'll talk about that next week, right? So you've got that actual data. This data translates to your blue line here. The red line is what you've entered here. So you want to make sure that you don't find a situation like this. And this does happen. People will put in their baseline, and then when they put in their actual data, and then when they show their graph, you're like, dude, your baseline doesn't agree with your data. So something's going on, right? So we want to make sure that those 2 agree with each other, right? And then you've got your objective, which is whatever you put your objective. Now, this then tracks down and it creates here in this transition zone, it calculates the transition line, right? Don't worry about that. Now, one note on these Excel spreadsheets, with the exception of things like the charter and the charter and the SIPOC, the rest of these are all protected files. They are not password protected. You can undo them and change them all you want, have at it, modify it to your heart's delight. Doesn't matter to me, right? But keep an original copy somewhere, so in case you botch it up, you can always go back to the original. That's why they're protected, to keep you from accidentally botching up. But none of them are password protected. If you want to unprotect it, you go to Review, and you go to Protect, and you tell it to Unprotect Sheet, right? So you'll notice here, I can't click anywhere except for where I can enter data. Only the yellow areas can I click. But I can modify it by unprotecting it, and I can go click anywhere I want. I can change anything. Just be careful. They're easy to botch up, right? But modify it any way you want to. If you're handy with Excel, you'll figure it out. It's really easy, right? But that's the way all of the forms, the capability analysis, the statistical analysis, the DOE, all this stuff is protected, but none of it is password protected. So you can modify it ever how you need to. Just be aware of the consequences. If you do modify it, you might botch it up. So just make sure your graph looks like it looked originally. You can increase the amount of baseline time. Have at it, right? Good. But just make sure it doesn't botch it up where the lines are going backwards or goofy or something like that. That happens. People try to make it better and they wind up messing it up. It's easy enough to fix. I'll be glad to do it for you in coaching, but there it is. All right. So we talked about a lot today, right? We did an introduction to what Lean Sigma is. We went through a discussion of what your team looks like, who your manager is, who your champion is going to be, who your teammates were, right? Who needs to recruit them, what makes for a good champion, and so forth. Then we started moving into this idea of the SIPOC diagram, which is it's the first thing you're going to do with your team once you get them in. You're going to get them in a team meeting. You're going to have a kickoff from your champion. You'll talk through the charter. Then you'll work a SIPOC. Make sure everybody's on their level set. Everybody knows what we're working on. They know what the problem is from the charter, so they know what they're doing, right? I've been on teams where I was brought in. I didn't know why I was there. I didn't know what the team was being, what the team was put together for. I didn't even know how we were measured. I'm like, why am I here again? I got stuff to do, right? We want to avoid that. That's why we're using a charter. That's why we're using a metric. That's why we got a champion kickoff, right? We also then here have spent some time talking about our project charter. Arguably, the most important part of all of our discussion is make sure you've got a good problem statement. It's measurable, it's actionable, it's realistic, it's time-based, it's smart. You've heard this term SMART metrics. It's SMART, right? SMART. That's what we're doing with this problem statement, right? Specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, or realistic and time-bound, right? So we're following that guideline, this ancient guideline from last century on how to scope out good projects, right? And that's what we're doing. So moving forward, again, coaching is available next Tuesday. If you go on to Canvas, you'll see the invite. Go pick a scheduled time. I look forward to talking to you, right? If you make a time, keep the time. Don't just stand me up. I dealt with that enough in high school and college. I don't want to be stood up anymore, right? That's why you get married. So I hope you don't get stood up. But even then it happens then. You're like, really, dude? Really? I'm kidding. But if you have to cancel, fine. But cancel it. Don't let it hang out there. And don't not show, right? People do that. The link is not the same as the training. It's a separate link. It's in the invite and it's on the announcement on Canvas. So make sure you see that. Because what will happen is Monday, if not enough people show up, I'll open coaching up for other people. Right. But you have first choice. So if you want to do it, go ahead and book it now. Don't wait till Monday night at 7 p.m. You may not have anything left. So do it now because I'll probably open it up Monday afternoon, depending. If everybody signs up, excellent. I prefer that. Everybody good? Everybody okay where we're at? By next week, by next Thursday night at midnight, you have to turn in your project charter. So turn in what you got. If you're still gathering baseline information, cool, but turn in something. Don't just not turn it in. Don't blow it off. Turn something in, right? And believe me, I want to work with you and I want you to be successful. So with that said, I'll stop here. I'll remain afterwards. Anybody has any questions? I've only got a couple of minutes. I've got a couple other obligations I got to deal with, but I'll be happy and make sure you sign up for coaching next week. All right. Thank you very much for your time, and I will stop